to take the appointment of chair and vice chair as the first issue on the agenda, please? That looks like Paul, could I ask you to turn your camera off, please, for a minute? Thank you. Okay, so the amendment to the actual agenda item should now read, and I need your agreement on this, please, is appointment of chair and vice chairs. That the two vice chairs are appointed to Caithness Committee, one proposed from each of the two county wards, and that these deputies will assume the reinstated civic roles of the Provost of Thurso and the Provost of Wick, and that the appointees would have a civic role, but that the roles and responsibilities will be taken back for formal agreement at the next Caithness Committee meeting, which is scheduled for 22nd of October 2020. Can I ask if you're on agreement with that as the agenda item that we will deal with first?
Agreed.
Okay, thank you very much, members. Okay, on to agenda item 1. Could I please have, due to work commitments, Councillor Marcy Rees is stepping down as chair of the Caithness Committee. So I'm looking for a nomination or nominations for a new chair, please.
You should see my hand raised.
Okay, Raymond.
I'd like to nominate Councillor Nicola Sinclair.
Thank you. Do we have a seconder for Councillor Bremner's nomination?
Yes. I'll second that, Alex.
You have. See my hand up.
I'll take that as Councillor Willie Mackay, if that's okay, members.
Thank
Do
you.
we have any other nominations for the chair of the Caithness Committee? Okay, so Councillor Nicola Sinclair is now being voted in as chair of the Caithness Committee. Congratulations, Councillor Sinclair. Can I now ask you, please, if you will take the rest of the meeting by calling for the vice chairs, please? Thank you.
Yes, so in accordance with the amendment that's been tabled, can I have nominations for the position of vice chair, starting with Ward 2? Alex, can you please confirm for me that the nominations should come for Ward 2 should come from Ward 2 only?
Sorry, say again, Councillor.
Nominations for vice chair for Ward 2, should they come from Ward 2, or can we take nominations from Ward 3? Because Councillor Bremner and Councillor Mackay both have their hands up.
Just point of order.
Yes, Councillor Bremner.
I would have considered that it would only be appropriate that the members from Ward 2 would be those who would nominate and choose the vice chair for their area.
That sounds a sensible idea to me, and unless anybody's got any contrary to that suggestion by Councillor Bremner. Councillor Rosie, you have your hand up.
Yes, thank you. Sorry, I just had a bit of drop off there. So I would like to nominate Councillor Mackey, please.
Thanks, Councillor Rosie. Do you have a seconder for Councillor Mackey?
So I think our issue is...
There's only two of us on the call, Nicola.
Yes. So I think Councillor Rees and Councillor Mackay are absent, I think.
I have no indication of apologies from Councillor Mackay or Councillor Rees.
Okay, so I don't think I can nominate a second.
I would agree with that, yes. I'm afraid we'll have to carry that forward to the next committee meeting. Councillor Bremner?
I take it that we can't take a 50% of the Ward 2 being present as a majority.
I would agree, yes, it's not a majority.
Then I wish I'd never said what I'd said at the beginning there just now. So if it's okay, we'll move to Ward 3. Sorry, boys.
I don't think we've got any choice for the sake of protocol, but to adjourn it for the next meeting for Ward 2 at least. Shall we move on to Ward 3 and we can pick up Ward 2 at the next meeting?
Agreed.
So, Councillor Mackay?
This is for Vice Chair. I would like to nominate Raymond Bremner.
That's a real shame because I would like to nominate Councillor Willie Mackay.
This is for Vice Chair.
This is for Vice Chair.
Councillor Andrew Sinclair? Do you have?
Oh yeah, Andrew.
I was minded to nominate Willie as well, because I think that the provost role and the civic duties that relate to that is something that he particularly excels in.
Yeah, but is it not different? We're not talking about different positions here. The Vice Chair. Did you say, I think at the start, the Vice Chair would be carrying on as civic leader and now provost, possibly?
I never mentioned anything about civic leader. It was the amendment tabled was the provost of Wick, and that the appointees would have a civic role, but the roles and responsibilities would be taken back for normal agreement at the next Caithness committee.
So just to clarify, Councillor Mackay and Councillor Mackey might be able to jump in here too. I think what we're proposing is instead of having one civic leader, we will have 2 vice chairs, one for Ward 3, one for Ward 2, and that they will act as civic head, but also have specific responsibilities in working with the chair to drive forward items for Wards 2 and 3. So it would replace the civic leader role, and you may wish to continue in that role. Councillor Mackay?
Yeah, okay. Yeah, that's okay. That's understandable. Yeah, agreed. Okay, I go with that. Thanks, Raymond.
You're welcome, Willie.
So we have a motion or vote for Councillor Willie Mackay as Provost, Vice Chair of Wick, nominated by Raymond Bremner and nominated by Councillor Raymond Bremner and seconded by Councillor Andrew Sinclair. Is there any other nomination?
Can I just ask for clarification that Councillor Mackay has withdrawn his nomination of myself?
Yeah, agreed, Raymond. Withdrawn.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Alex, can I just point out that Councillor Rees has joined us now, so maybe we could move to nominations for Ward 2 again.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Sinclair. Councillor Rees, are you there?
Yes, I am here. I might not stay here. For some reason, our internet is absolutely horrendous this morning. I did actually try to phone you, Alex, but your phone was obviously off for the meeting. But thank you, Nicola. I am here.
Thank you, Councillor Rees. Have you heard any of the start of the meeting?
No, I haven't, but I think I've deduced it for myself. Thank you.
Would you like me to read the agenda item that has been moved to item 1?
That would be helpful. Thank you.
Okay, the agenda item is the appointment of a chair for the Caithness committee, and that has been agreed, and the new chair is now Councillor Nicholas Sinclair. And then another amendment was that 2 vice or deputy chairs are appointed to Caithness committee, 1 proposed for each of the 2 county wards, and that these deputies will assume the reinstated civic roles of the Provost of Thurso and the Provost of Wick, and that the appointees would have a civic role, but that the roles and responsibilities will be taken back for formal agreement at the next Caithness committee meeting, which is scheduled for 22nd October 2020. Now, the chair did call for nominations for Ward 2, but unfortunately we did not have enough members available. And for Ward 3, the members have voted in Councillor Willie Mackay. So for Ward 2, and Councillor Carl Roseley nominated Councillor Struan Mackey for that role, and we didn't have anybody else to second that. So I'm looking for your input here, Councillor Rees.
Yeah, thank you, Alex. First of all, congratulations to Councillor Nicola St Clair. Delighted, and I mean that. And secondly, equally delighted to nominate, Councillor Mackey for Ward 2.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Rees. So can I just recap, members, please? So the new chair of the Caithness Committee is Councillor Nicola Sinclair. Deputy chair representing Ward 2 is Councillor Struan Mackey, and the deputy chair representing Ward 3 is Councillor Willie Mackay. Am I right in what I've said there? Okay, thank you, members. Can we move on now, please? The second item is, I'm looking for apologies for absence. I now think the only member missing is Councillor Donny Mackay from Ward 2. Would that be correct? Yeah.
That is correct, Alex. I think he might be having issues getting online with Teams this morning. I don't know if it's the same issue I was having, but I've tried to get in contact with him on the platform and he's been unresponsive.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Mackey. I'll now hand the agenda back over to the chair to take forward from declaration of interest. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Before we move on to declaration of interest, I did just want to say a few words, but I'll be very brief because I know we've got a lot of important business to discuss today. I want to start just by thanking Councillor Rees for serving as chair for the past 2 years on this committee. Councillor Rees has brought a great deal of pragmatism, careful judgment and humility to the role, and he's been a calming influence at the same time as working hard to represent Caithness' best interests within Highland Council. Thank you for electing me as chair, and I hope to build on the foundations that we've already laid by pushing Caithness Committee forward as a more powerful and relevant forum for local decision making. The Council has made a commitment towards localism, and it's important we collectively seize the opportunity to ensure that as elected members we're working together to address the issues that matter most to our community and to ensure that those issues are championed at a Highland level. As chair, I know I won't get it right every time, and I won't always have all the answers, but I hope to facilitate closer collaboration between the 8 of us, between local officers and partners across county and party lines. It's something we've always done really well in Caithness, and I think it's a unique power that we have and that we can build on. It'll be all the more important now as we emerge from this pandemic and seek to rebuild our economy and social structures. And I've got great confidence that we can harness the inspirational example that's been set by our community to deliver meaningful progress. So I just wanted to say thank you for giving me this opportunity, and I plan to work very hard and listen to all your views. We can now move on to item 3, declarations of interest. Councillor Bremner.
Thank you, Chair. With your permission, I'd like to also address item 1 on the agenda.
Yep, go ahead.
I think today is a day of new opportunity, and I appreciate what the Chair has just said. I think it's a day that we can bring a focus directly onto the things that matter in Caithness and to highlight them as matters of importance within the Highland Council. Not that we haven't tried to do that before, but too often we can hold that opinion, agree with the opinion, but don't voice it loud enough. Too often I think that we have tried to coerce the leaders of council and be in with them and not upset them and end up being happy with our lot and the fact that we at least tried. But the Highland Council is a really big area, we know that. And being in Inverness in terms of council often doesn't quite appeal to the voters that we have here in Caithness. And whilst we seek to look to effect matters of importance to Caithness in Inverness, sometimes our voice isn't quite heard loud and clear here. We know, for example, that we have housing issues that affect the overall programme figures of council. It has been like that since long before I was a councillor. I have a great interest in trying to tackle that and bringing initiatives forward from a Caithness point of view that try to tackle that. That is something that we need to have a determined focus on, agreed by us, and a chair that will take that on board and recognise it as something that we have to proactively work at in order to change it. We have drugs issues that we have been working with, and we have mental health issues that we need to have a coordinated focus on, a recognised coordinated focus. We have poverty and antisocial behavioural issues that are not unique to Caithness, but are unique in many different ways to different areas of the Highlands, including Caithness. We have economic factors here that are different in many ways to the economic factors that affect other parts of the Highlands. And we have regeneration issues that are different, even if not unique to many parts of the Highlands. We need to focus on these issues as an effective area committee. Sometimes we seem to be hamstrung with the fact that we can't bring motions and questions to this committee, and we need to lobby to change that. Not to be cautious in case we upset some of our Inverness-based colleagues, with the greatest of respect, by challenging that. I'd like to also thank Matthew for his time as chair of the area committee and wish him well as he seeks with others to commit to trying to resolve the financial challenges of the Highland Council, and that is an unenviable task that we have at the moment, given the period of coronavirus that we are still seeking to come through with our community. This is something that we're all committed to. We need someone in the chair who is physically present in Caithness and has the time and energy to devote to a particular focus on these issues that matter to Caithness. So I wish you well, Nicola, in your role as chair. In the past 3 years, you've made a material contribution and that many local people will recognise, and that's what counts. That's what matters. Representing Caithness must also be seen to be representing Caithness. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Councillor Bremner. Councillor Rees.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And thank you for your kind words, both yourself, Nicola, and Raymond. Just a few very quick points. I can remember sitting some months ago, just before the pandemic broke, and being struck in some of the documentation I was reading about how very unusually, as far as the emergency phase of the coronavirus was concerned, our main function was actually one of support to the Category 1 responders, namely the emergency services, the NHS, etc., etc. But now, hopefully, that we're coming out of the virus, I think our role is actually metamorphosing back to what we're perhaps more accustomed to doing, which is leadership. And it's reassuring to see the figures of the reduction in the virus, and we obviously all hope that continues. I think part of the leadership, which I know you'll be very good at, Chair, is encouragement, not just to each other, the 8 of us, but also to the third sector in particular, and just the general public. You know, everything we do, we need to try and build people up and just do our best. There are some huge challenges. I think Raymond touched on it there, but the mental health challenges in the county, the No More Lost Souls campaign, and other groups. Caithness Mental Health Support Group is one that I represent as well. There's just so much to do there. Raymond, you were absolutely spot on. The budget is an unenviable task, but hopefully I will be able to devote a bit more. Well, I know I will need to devote more time to it because of the challenges, but not just Highland Council, but every local authority is facing. Very simply, I will just do my best, and that's all I can do. So to conclude, Nicola, best wishes for your time in the chair. You have my full support, you have everybody's full support, I'm quite sure, in the committee, and we look forward to the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Rees. Councillor Mackay.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Congratulations on your elevation. You like that word? It's really good. Yeah, I think looking at the screen here in front of me, I don't want to echo what's been said already, but looking at this fine screen in front of me here, what we've got here is we have people that will work together. I think that's the most important part of Caithness, that we can work together irrespective of our party political persuasions. We all care for what happens north of the Ord. And that's proved over the last 4 months. There's no doubt about it, how this community, this large, one big family, have worked together. Now we have a wonderful leader here to take us forward. So congratulations, Nicola. And it's lovely to see all you wonderful people on the screen in front of me. Well done.
Thanks, Councillor Mackay. Councillor Mackey.
I think Councillor Rosie was before me there, Chair. I think his hand was up.
Apologies, Councillor Rosie.
Thank you, Chair, and congratulations. Also like to record my thanks for Matthew and his work that's gone before you. So look, I won't dwell too much on what's been said. I think we all appreciate the challenges that we've got, but particularly interested in Wally and Matthew's comments. We've now got the opportunity to provide leadership, and just a very brief general reminder on the opportunities we have in Ward 2, Nicola. I'm thinking both myself and Councillor Mackey, we have an outstanding action to engage with Faroe Islands as one example. That in itself offers up new opportunities for business. And I think if we mention Faroe Islands, one of the topical issues in local press over recent weeks was a negative story in us losing air services. It's quite interesting to note, in contrast, just what the Faroe Islands have in the way of air services. They just recently took delivery of another brand new Airbus 320. SAS, the Scandinavian Airlines, they announced last week that they're increasing their number of flights. So look, I highlight these points because these are the opportunities I think we should seek to think in a different way. We've got to think in a different way. And just one of the other points that's already been touched relates to another Scandinavian neighbour in Iceland, where the Planet Youth Organisation have reached out to us to offer a partnership arrangement to explore what is known as the Icelandic model. And these can address some of the issues around substance abuse and mental health. So, look, we've got some fantastic opportunities, and I look forward to working with you and the rest of the Caithness councillors. So, thank you very much.
Thanks, Councillor Rosie, and I think it's fair to say we'll hit the ground running and set up a meeting straight away so we can discuss the issues in Ward 2, Ward 3 and those that affect the whole county, and see if we can get an action plan put together as soon as we can. Councillor Mackey?
Thank you, Chair, and congratulations. Very much look forward to working with you, and to echo what the other Caithness members have said. I think there's a bit of a turning point today and a renewed sense of enthusiasm about how we can do things differently in Caithness to represent what is a very unique part of the Highland Council, and quite often has very differing priorities to the rest of the local authority. And I think it really is an opportunity today to start driving that agenda forward. And congratulations on your appointment. And I can say wholeheartedly that we will support you in every endeavour to ensure that the needs, quite frankly, of Caithness are displayed quite clearly, and we put forward our case as robustly as we possibly can, whether it's to Highland Council, Scottish Government, or indeed to Westminster. On a separate note, I'd just like to thank Ward 2 members for their opportunity to represent God's country, which of course is Ward 2 in Northwest Caithness. And I think that this, when we come back to
point of order, Chair. It is not a known fact that Ward 2 is God's country.
Okay, I'll retract that, Raymond, but we all know it's true. And just in terms of, driving this forward and the new roles, when we come back to talk about the roles and responsibilities, I think we're now beginning to get, hopefully from today, a structure that supports the chair, but also supports and drives forward but not only the ambitions, but the needs of the county going forward. And I'd just like to thank members again, and thank you, Chair.
Thanks very much. I'm not seeing any more hands up, so I'll move on to declarations of interest. Okay, I'm not seeing any hands up. I want to declare an interest, and I'm not actually sure if it needs declared, but for the sake of transparency, in relation to the return to schools update, I have 2 children attending Newton Park School and nursery. It's obviously non-financial. So do we have Paul Senior to provide us with his update, please?
Sorry, Councillor Rosie has his hand up, Chair.
Apologies, Councillor Rosie.
No problem. I should imagine that we'll be talking about Thurso Community Development Trust, looking at the agenda, so just a non-financial interest as a board member.
Okay, noted, thank you. Anybody else? Okay, Paul, can I ask you to begin your report to us, please? Welcome.
Thank you, Chair, and congratulations on your appointment. And good morning, all members. And also thank you to everyone for the invitation to attend this meeting. It's good to meet a number of you in this forum. So I think I've met a number of you in various forums so far, but I'm keen, as I say, in the spirit of localism and partnership working in our local areas to engage with these local conversations as well. So thank you for the invitation. I suppose my update today follows on from the conversations at last week's Education Committee and previous briefings with a focus on the reopening of our schools and settings in August. As colleagues will be aware, hopefully from the information recently circulated, we are now working towards 100% return to schools in August. That's the primary focus. Yes, we've looked at options A, B and C, option A being the 100% return, option B being the 100% return with a 1 metre social distancing measure being deployed, and option C, which took up a lot of time in June in terms of planning and preparation, with a focus on 50%, getting to that 50% objective, maintaining 2 metres social distancing. Following recent determinations from the national government, we are now primarily, as I said, focusing on the 100% return with no social distancing measures being deployed. So we're maintaining a commitment to localism. We are making sure that all of our schools are undertaking risk assessments to be at the front end of all activity, and risk assessments will determine, risk assessments will govern in terms of how our schools will reopen. We are maintaining the design principle that management of risk and maintaining the health, safety and well-being of all of our children, young people, families, staff and their communities is the primary objective here. We want our schools to reopen formally and properly and in the right way. See, over the coming weeks, the buildings will be cleaned and as ready as possible for the environment for our learners to return. 100% return in August with no social distancing measures being deployed, as colleagues will be aware, will be based on what the R number tells us, where the reinfection rate is, how safe and secure our buildings are. A number of colleagues in this forum and other forums have challenged me to say, can we get to this number? Can we get there? Can we get there? The ambition remains that we want all of our schools and settings and 100% of our learners to be able to turn in August, but it will be about management of risk. We will go where the data tells us and where the risk assessments determine. So those are the crucial developments. Since last Thursday's Education Committee meeting, there have been not too many further developments. I've wrote to head teachers on Thursday, thanking them for their efforts and the flexibility, innovation and creativity, which has been crucial throughout this process in terms of continuously adapting and adjusting plans and processes. And not just our head teachers and colleagues in schools and settings, but all of the council services, the central services, such as transport, catering, IT, facilities management, just to mention a few, who have all formed an important part of the education eco-structure. Because as much as our colleagues in schools and settings and parents and carers are at the front end of this, the support services that enable the ecosystem to progress are important. So it's important that we endorse and recognise their endeavours as well. So I suppose, as I said, the primary message today is that we are working towards the 100% objective with no social distancing measures. We await further guidance. We had some more come through on Friday from Scottish Government, which is helpful, but the information is coming through almost on a daily basis, which we have to interpret and adapt and adjust. But during July, we're not downing tools. Planning activity and preparation activity will continue. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks very much, Paul, and we appreciate you taking the time today. Don't underestimate. Sorry, Paul, would you mind muting your microphone? We're getting some feedback. Thank you. We don't underestimate the size of the challenge that you have ahead of you just now and how hard yourself and your teams are working, and we appreciate you making the time to update us today. Members, do you have questions for Paul? Councillor Bremner.
Thanks, Paul. It's good to see you in the Caithness setting, and it is not an easy task that you've been set in the position, your new position, and I'm absolutely certain that it will already have been a hot seat, and you may have already felt it since the day that you came into it. Especially given the time that we're living in and the particular challenge that we all recognise for all our schools in the different areas of the Highlands. in being able to keep our communities safe. Once we bring the children back together, we recognise there are difficult and different challenges depending on the age groups of the children. Could you give me a wee, just for the benefit of our community and the fact that we are a Caithness committee here, just an understanding of some of the work in Caithness that's going on in terms of two things. One, in terms of the space and the availability to be able to be within government guidelines, because that's different with the different age groups of the children. And the second one is transport here in Caithness is something where we tend to find that the transport providers, the buses, are provided. It's a kind of fragile transport economy that we've got here. So we have to rely on everything knitting together. And the schools are an integral part of that, along with Dunray and the public service contracts that we have in Caithness. What discussions have been had with the Stagecoach and the transport providers for our children, and what do you think are going to be the regulations that we have to comply with in terms of spacing? They may be different within the school as to what they will be on public transport. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Bremner. Those are key questions that have been coming up in the local area planning activity. As colleagues will be aware, on a weekly basis since the beginning of June, head teachers and partners, stakeholders and providers have been engaged in a weekly programme of consultation and planning and preparation with regards to undertaking activity to arrange for schools to return. We are now committed, Councillor Bremner, to working towards 100% returning back to school in August with no social distancing measures. So let me be clear on that. That's on the back of the latest government guidance. In the event that we have to fall back on 100% with 1 metre social distancing measures been deployed or 2 metres been deployed, then naturally we have plans in place for those. But 100% is the primary focus with no social distancing. If we can achieve that objective, then in terms of transport and in terms of buildings and safety and security and that, then that really should be business as usual. But I understand your challenge with regards to, well, what if we have to fall back on option B or option C? What measures do we have in place? With regards to transport, as I've previously advised, we do have a transport subgroup, which has got the input of our transport providers and partners shaping those conversations, has got the input of head teachers and other agencies as well. Transport, Councillor Bremner, within this part of the region is absolutely a major barrier. Transport in terms of not just in Scotland, but in terms of the entire UK, in terms of servicing learners being able to return back to school, maintaining social distancing has been the biggest barrier. Transport providers making it very clear if social distancing measures had to be deployed, we will be looking at no more than 20% of occupancy being able. So we recognise that's a major barrier. I can't say to you that we've got the solution here, all of the solutions. What I can say to you is that we have the right people in terms of providers, operators, officers, heads involved in trying to find flexible and creative solutions. Anything from fuel vouchers for parents, if need be, to help service and get learners back into school, and pooling and grouping of parents, transport as well. So I can't say to you what the definitive answer will be if we have to fall back on option C, which is 50% in school, 2 metres been deployed. But what I can say to you is they will be exhausting. As a transport group, they will have exhausted all avenues of opportunity to maximise learner time so that transport is a minimal barrier. But as I said, that said, we are working towards 100% return in August with no social distancing, in which case transport should be able to operate without any social distancing. You asked the point about buildings, space and availability, working within government guidelines. My answer again would be similar. We are working towards 100% schools return, schools reopening with no social distancing measures being deployed. If we do need to fall back on the 1 metre or 2 metre criteria, again, assessments have been undertaken with our schools and settings to maximise. So all of our schools and settings have individual risk assessments and individual plans to help them get up to that 50% number. For some of them, it's more of a challenge. And in particular, this region, this part of the region, we recognise in terms of access to additional buildings, it's a greater strain. in terms of being able to provide that, it's a gap. There's no denying that. Some of our schools in this space have really struggled. So when we talk about the need for blended learning, if we do have to fall back, and I'm very clear, if we do have to fall back from the 100% criteria for August, then in terms of there will be more of a reliance on blended learning to be able to help us bridge that gap.
Okay, thank you very much. I now have Councillor Rees, Councillor Mackey and Councillor Rosie. I think that's the order the hands are put up in, so I'll take Councillor Rees.
Thank you, Chair. Paul, thank you, and welcome to Caithness virtually. Several points, I'll go through them as quick as I can. For Ward 2, we'd very much like you, when it's safe to do so and feasible for you to come and visit. Particularly, I would draw your attention, I think, to the high school in Thurso. The building is 60 years old, and I need to say at this stage, we are not starting to look for a brand new shiny school. Far from it. The staff just want to make a few pragmatic, simple improvements to the building over the next short period. One small query I had on the vexed subject of the DSM monies. You'll be well aware, I know for a fact, that last year's DSM has been held back to try and plug part of the budget gap. But I wanted to ask you, and apologies for no sort of forewarning on this, where schools like, for example, Thurso High are wanting to spend, relatively speaking, a pretty small sum of money on basic improvements, and those projects haven't happened. What's the position there for the school to carry out these works? I assume you probably haven't been to Thurso High School. It sits in a very exposed site. And for some of the children who are in wheelchairs, on occasions, when they're having to be wheeled from block to block, not often, but sometimes the weather is so bad, it's simply not safe for these children to be taken from one building to another. So lifts are planned, for example. That's just one example of facilities that the school lacks, although it more than makes up for that lack by the quality of the staff and just the general feeling of the place, the can-do attitude. But I wanted to ask about that specific money point. And finally, Raymond's point there about the transport was very well made. I would actually go, and I'm not certain on this because I'm not an expert on school transport, certainly for our ward, from what I've seen and from my understanding of the transport arrangements, particularly for the high school, but not exclusively, I actually have a doubt, literally, as to whether there are physically enough public transport type vehicles, whether they're coaches or minibuses or taxis. Literally, I'm unsure if there are enough vehicles to take children to school if the 2-metre restrictions remain in place. I think, for example, the minibus can only take 2 pupils as well as the driver. And I've done a little bit of work on it, but I actually think there may not be enough vehicles to do it. So Raymond's point is an extremely good one. Because we're so remote, the problems, as usual, are more difficult and more serious. So I, for one, am just hoping very much that the children can go back to school and that all will be well. But thank you again for your time. Thank you, Chair, as well.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Rees. And in following on from Councillor Bremmer's comments regarding transport, I would agree that is one of the key barriers here. The system, capacity-wise, my officers are telling me, in the best of times, the transport system is maxed out in terms of what it can provide, in terms of to meet needs. We recognise this. So we're going to require some incredible, flexible, innovative, creative solutions, as I said, such as potentially offering parents fuel vouchers, which is a key consideration when I look at practice in other large-scale local authorities that I've been involved with in recent years. Well, hopefully, we won't be reliant on that, because hopefully we'll be able to return 100% in August with the need for no social distancing. But our transport group, as I said, are looking at all potential options, including, as I say, cycling, vouchers, whatever. I can't give you a definitive list at this juncture of what those options will be. But rest assured, our transport providers, as well as our lead officers for that area of focus, are involved. And there's going to be conversations with parents from the Parent Council Partnership during July as well, to make sure our plans are co-designed and co-production as well. The system is maxed out normally, so we recognise the strain that challenge is going to bring. Councillor Rees, you mentioned about the local school in terms of the building. I'm not aware of specific individual capital development works that are ongoing, but I do know that the capital programmes I've had sighting recently, those developments are ongoing. With regards to individual use of resources, I couldn't possibly comment on any individual work stream, but if there is something that they have a specific need, there is a programme of capital works to be undertaken by key officers, and there is sequencing there in response to the greatest level of need. If such a school has such a request, please, if you can ask them to send me the information, I'll ensure it's forwarded to the relevant capital people for consideration. If we've got schools, we wish to enable and empower our schools to be as fit for purpose and as ready as possible. We recognise that COVID-19 has presented us with a range of challenges that are totally unprecedented. And the use of the DSM underspend last year, and as I remind colleagues, it was an underspend, as part of the overarching council 9,500 workforce, preserving and safeguarding the work of valuable services, including a lot of statutory services such as children's social care, adult social care. And we've got to try and preserve the whole ecosystem, and with the greatest respect, it's incumbent on the local authority to continue or consider all options. Lots of local authorities across the UK currently are on the verge of bankruptcy as a result of the challenges faced by COVID-19. Bankruptcy, in other terms, means Section 114 in local government space, for colleagues who are not aware. I've worked in local authorities that are in Section 114 space, and if colleagues aren't aware of it, it means you lose control. It means national government takes over and sends in commissioners. And as local councillors, as local officers, there is a complete loss of control when local authorities are in that space. There are a significant number of English councils who are on the verge of Section 114 space. I'm not sitting here as running here, I'm just being candid. It's very clear that the funding gap at the moment, it's incumbent on us to consider all options. Local authorities are considering, if it's not statutory in terms of services, then they may not be able to afford it. So it is incumbent on the local authority to have considered using DSM underspend, not the next year's budget, or even underspend, okay? Because if I was a commissioner going into a local authority that had gone into bankruptcy or facing Section 114, as I have done in recent years with a number of authorities, one of the first questions and key challenges I would be presenting is, why did you spend discretionary funds without discharging your statutory duties? Statutory duties come first, discretionary comes second. But Councillor Rees, in response to your query with regards to that school, please, if the information could be sent to me, I'll make sure the relevant officers in Capital look at that, please. Thank you.
Members, if I could just remind you that any questions in this item have to be specifically about the reopening of schools, just so that we keep on track. Next I have Councillor Mackey.
Thank you very much, Chair. And if you'd allow me just a minute of latitude before I get on to my question, just like to thank the Executive Chief Officer for attending committee today. I think it's really important that we get as many senior officers to report back to the regional or the area committees as possible, and I'd like to think this is us starting as we mean to go on. And I would just like to put on record, Paul, my thanks to your staff, teachers and support staff and the head teachers, because throughout this pandemic, they've not only continued in their roles, they've also, I know a number of them are kind of double jobbing in many respects and doing far more than you would expect of a teacher. And many of them are now delivering numerous hours of digital learning that I know very few of them had ever had experience of before the pandemic, and that can only be commended. And I know it's been very tough for the teachers, it's been difficult, and that there's been changing goalposts when it's come back to the return to school environment, when we've been preparing for one scenario and then it's changed. And whenever we've discussed this with staff, and I know that we've had some very good Caithness consultation meetings over the last number of weeks, it's always been about the welfare of students and how they are getting their the best educational experience possible. The focus has always been on our students, and I think all of your staff must be commended for that. Turning to the return to school update, as you'll know, Paul, we have a lot of very, very rural schools, and I'll not touch on the element of transport. But understandably, I know that parents have significant concerns about potentially returning students, given the continuing state of the pandemic And many of our rural schools, when we were looking at the percentages that would be able to be returned in August, were actually pretty healthy. Some of our rural schools were in far better shape than, for example, our high schools. And I was wondering if that's still the case, given the different moving goalposts, as I was mentioning a little bit earlier on. And are you aware that is there a suggestion that there's a kind of significant move towards parents thinking about homeschooling, because that's certainly something that I've heard on the grapevine, although it's something that's very hard to corroborate, because I think there is still concern about sending kids back to school if parents aren't content with measures or maybe are just being overly cautious. And I know that homeschooling is something that we always struggle to get a handle on, given that we don't have direct responsibility for it within either the Highland Council or indeed this committee. But thank you again, Paul, for your verbal update.
Well, thank you, Councillor Mackay. It's encouraging to those kind words, and I will ensure those are shared with officers and our colleagues in schools. And I appreciate you recognising the full range of officers and colleagues in schools who have been engaged in the schools reopening programme. Unfortunately, there have been too many occasions when it seems that only our colleagues in schools and settings have been recognised for their endeavours in allowing for the ecosystem to take place and progress. Whereas our colleagues working hard in transport, catering, cleaning, facilities management, they're an important part of the system, without whom the system couldn't thrive. So, Councillor Mackay, I really do thank you for recognising that and endorsing that, because as I said, everybody deserves that recognition. Many times I've had conversations with officers in the recent weeks, and they're not based in schools and settings, but they say to me, why are we not being recognised for contributing to the system? Why is it only the people in schools and settings are getting recognised? So it's encouraging that you and other colleagues today have recognised the breadth of the ecosystem. With regards to homeschooling, anecdotally, not just in Highland, but in other local authorities across Scotland and in England, I've heard anecdotal information that might be on the rise. And as colleagues will be aware, as local authorities, we don't have legislative powers to be able to intervene. What we can do is identify, capture the data, and make sure that we have plans in place to remedy that and go beyond that. There will be naturally be anxiety amongst a number of our parents and carers and children and young people about returning for a number of reasons, and not just those folk, but our staff as well, who have been away from settings. It's incumbent on us, where we have the data, to be targeted in our approach. And if parents are expressing an interest, if the numbers are increasing out of normal trend, then to have those conversations with parents to try and get an understanding what's the rationale, what's the narrative behind why they've chosen to go with the homeschooling route. And if there is a way to help manage those anxieties and alleviate those anxieties through simple things such as the use of videos and of school buildings to help people feel more assured and more confident. If there's the opportunity to make better use of, some of our colleagues and some of our council meetings have said, better use of data. You know, Highland region is one of the most safest places in the UK. Our schools and our settings, if we get it right, should be amongst some of the safest. And so the use of data to influence and persuade will be important. So our PR on this is important. We've recently set up a web page with a focus on the reopening of schools, and hopefully colleagues would have had access to the frequently asked questions documents for parents and carers, again, which will hopefully go some way to managing those anxieties. So you will hopefully have had access to that. We've also done versions for schools and settings as well. So on the PR side, we'll need to make sure we're on our A game. We're on the front foot. Parents and carers are engaged as part of our process. As I've said before, we held in my second week in office a meeting with the Highland Parent Council Partnership with over 180 folk in attendance, following which all schools were asked then to have their own local parent council partnership meeting to help manage those anxieties. So it doesn't matter how much communication, PR, engagement we do, there will always be a cohort who are most nervous and the anxieties are there. Where we have the data, it's incumbent on us to follow up in a targeted way and have those conversations and afford parents and children as much time and space as possible to help get over those nerves. So my officers are committed to this. But just coming back to your original point, Councillor Mackey, thank you so much for recognising the entire breadth of the ecosystem that is supporting our learners to return. As I say, the colleagues in schools and settings are an important part of the system, but with the greatest respect, we have a workforce of 9,500 across the council, many of whom are playing a role in enabling our learners to return. Thank you.
Thanks, Paul. Councillor Rosie.
Thank you, Chair. So my original questions have actually been answered, and then I was going to take the opportunity to comment on teaching staff and what they provided. I think I've done that with yourself before, Paul, and Struan covered all the points fantastically well. So I'll leave that alone. Maybe just a wee bit of learning for you, Paul. I noticed that you referred to Councillor Mackey as Mackay. So I was quite amused to watch you last week when Councillor Bremner was speaking Gaelic. So just a point to take on board for you.
Councillor, can I jump in there?
Sure.
Well, one of my officers who was attending the Education Committee meeting last week said he watched my face as Councillor Bremner started speaking Gaelic, and he said I didn't have my poker face on anyway. Put it that way.
Yeah. Okay. Look, I think this has been a really interesting debate and part of the agenda. I think there's a couple of things that strike me. One of my regrets was when we speak about Thursday High School, I always wonder the issues that we're faced with now, and when we're speaking about disabled access, we've got an issue with transport drop-off area. And then when I consider what we see as available in WIC, I've got quite a desire to see a new school. Now I get all the practicalities of finance and amongst that, but I just wonder, everyone recognises that we've got to think in a different way now, given the circumstances what we face. So I would hope that we can, particularly in regard to Ward 2, let's examine the estate that we've got on offer and see what's possible and what alternatives we do have. And just following on that theme, I'm glad, Paul, that you mentioned cycling and walking, because we've got an opportunity through active travel. I know that's been discussed already. The other thing is on transport. I think we've just on the point I've made about examining what's available. If there was one strength we have in Caithness, and we describe ourselves as being an energy county. I think we've got to look at renewable energy and what opportunities that may present. I had a very interesting meeting last week in regard to what's possible with the hydrogen economy, and who knows what we could create as a future for alternative transport options. So I'm going to stop there. So thank you very much. Just a gentle reminder, it's Mackey.
Thank you, Councillor Rosie. That will be one of my key takeaways from the conversation today. And Councillor Mackey, apologies. Sometimes my South East London twang gets a bit confused, but I will endeavour to close the gap in terms of picking up the local lingo and making sure that I don't make such foul mistakes again. Thank you.
No problem at all. Thanks, Paul.
Councillor Bremner.
And I give drug, Paul, Channy Medullivrina and Gaelic and Jew. Don't worry about it, Paul. I won't be speaking in Gaelic today. But here's another little wee thing for you to write down. Coming up from East London and learning. We don't speak Gaelic. That's the language of the Irish. Here we speak Gaelic. So there's another little learning curve for you as well. So you'll be going away wishing, thinking what an education it was for an education officer attending the Caithness committee. So I'm just going to come back actually on one point, and you'll forgive me. I'm not trying to flog a dead horse. It's just that one of the clear concerns of the community, and I know that there may not yet be absolute clarification from the Scottish Government and the guidelines that are forever changing. But the transport is particular to Caithness. I'm not sure that it's actually just in Caithness, but it's in other areas of the Highlands as well. But particularly here in Caithness, and I'm going to use WIC High School as an example. And if you're not familiar with the geography of Caithness yet, this might encourage you to find out a little bit more about it. But the buses that we have here are shared public transport buses, both out to the east, out to the west, heading towards God's country, as Struan mentioned earlier on, towards Watton and these areas. Also up to Keith and John O'Groats and down towards Dunbeath and Burradale and Leibster and past my own village here. They are all public transport services that are shared with the schools. So if there is a difference between the rules for children and young people on transport going to school, where there is no social distancing, and that of course takes away lots of issues in terms of transport to school. But if there is still social distancing in place for the public come August the 11th, that's probably what I was asking for us to nail. What impact is that having? Are we considering that we're going to have school-only transport rather than shared public transport and children travelling? Because that is virtually the bulk of all transport provision from the rural areas to our hub schools such as Wick High School. And maybe you might not have an ability to comment on that. I know that it's changing, the scene is changing every day in terms of government guidelines. But is it your consideration that we are planning for no social distancing on public transport for school children come August the 11th? And if not, what's the plans that we're looking at in terms of that?
Okay, thank you, Councillor Bremner. As I said, transport is a big issue, even more so for this area than most of the others for a number of reasons. We do have a local project board that's overseeing the work of schools return, of which transport is an important conversation, and local transport providers are part of that. So when I said about the commitment to localism, we do have, whilst I chair the overarching programme board, we do have a board for the north, for the south, for the mid and for the west area, of which there is representation to ensure that we're looking at some of the key barriers for each and every area, so it's not just a centralised approach. And as I've said before, the transport system in the best of times is pretty maxed out, and capacity-wise is an issue. In terms of the transport group, the subgroup that's looking at this, all options will be on the table for consideration. So it is a key consideration that if it's no social distancing for one group, but it is for some, what are the barriers, what's going to be the workaround? Councillor Bremner, I can't give you the answer at this juncture because it's still being worked through. Our transport group will be meeting throughout July to evaluate risks, to evaluate barriers, to evaluate solutions as well. But rest assured, my transport folk who are the specialists in that area, who are at the coalface, including our providers, will be part of working up solutions where best as possible. But as I said, I mean, the information we're receiving from national government is changing on a daily basis. So our groups have to interpret that as best as possible. 10 days ago, we were working towards option C, which was 50%, in which case we were obviously robust in that and very on the front foot. But as a result, now we're trying to get as much information as possible. What does it mean about 100%? What are the variables behind that? So hopefully in a couple of weeks, we would have designed out as much risk as possible. And I'll be in a position to give you a better answer on that. But what you will have my commitment is, Councillor Bremner, is that the transport group will be evaluating that and evaluating all options. And we have a local programme group as well that's looking at that. So it's not something that we're easing up on. It's a key consideration, Councillor Bremner.
Okay, thanks very much. Paul, would you mind muting your mic? Thanks. Just to reassure you, Paul, it's not just yourself that gets a hard time over the pronunciations when you come to Caithness Committee. Pretty much every officer that refers to us as Caithness, or any member that refers to us as Caithness, gets an equally hard time. It's Caithness. So you're not alone, don't worry. My colleagues have already outlined how impressed we are with your staff and what an incredible job they've all done in very difficult times. As a parent, I've had a different insight into this because I've had two children that have been supported through the nursery staff and through the school staff, and it's been quite amazing watching how the teachers have moved on to Google Classroom, learned that tool, learned how to provide all the resources for them, and also gone out of their way to make sure that they're looking after their well-being and the social elements of school, organising little Google Meets, online scavenger hunts, virtual sports days in the garden. You know, they're thinking outside the box and finding new ways of doing things. It's really impressive, and it also highlights just how much they care about the children that they're looking after on a personal level as well, which is really heartening. I've had 100 days of homeschooling, and I couldn't help but laugh at Councillor Mackey's question about all these parents that are going to want to take up homeschooling from now on, because it's put me off for life. And it just highlights what an excellent job our teachers are doing every day. On that, I just wanted to ask, we've had a spate of, well, we know that mental health problems are on the rise, and we've had, sadly, a number of people taking their own lives. And I think that it's really important that we don't underestimate the stress that the COVID crisis has placed on a number of people. I think our schools and head teachers, our teachers and head teachers, have had an enormous amount of strain, particularly the head teachers, in coming up with all these different scenarios for forward planning. And I just wanted to ask if the council has put anything in place to offer some kind of support for the teachers and head teachers as they scramble to get everyone back to school, to make sure that they have someone to talk to if they're struggling with it, and appropriate support to move forward.
Thank you, Chair. Mental health and well-being of our workforce is primary importance there. As Donna Manson, the Chief Executive, set out at Education Committee last week, we've recently undertaken a staff survey, of which we've had, as of last Thursday, 4,700 responses, so approaching 50% of the workforce in a very short space of time. The information from that will be able to enable us to identify, are there any particular sectors that are disproportionately overrepresented to allow for a targeted follow-up. In terms of our HR departments, our colleagues are working with our schools. My officers are in local areas are keeping in touch with their head teachers on a weekly basis, Chair, to ask those conversations. We have a weekly programme of meetings with primary head teachers in each locality, as well as a meeting each week with the secondary head teachers collectively. So that's a big group forum that allows for, if you like, a collective peer support and challenge approach, but also individual conversations. Even myself, last Friday, I had one-to-one conversations with 5 head teachers to, again, get a feel for how they're feeling, how things are going. We're checking in and asking those questions. So the ability to listen during this time is crucial. And if there is a need for a targeted support and follow-up, then that will be undertaken as well as part of the process. But as we've said many times before, Chair, we're in such unprecedented times. There isn't a blueprint for this, but what we have to do is be able to listen and respond accordingly. Some of our head teachers, some of our teaching staff, some of my officers in services are going to be in such a place of anxiety and concern and nervousness. It's incumbent on us that we all listen and be flexible where possible, as much as possible, to overcome the barriers to enabling our learners to return. But mental health, not just in the Highlands, but from my recent conversation with Secretary of State for Education in England last week, where that seems to be on the rise across the 24,000 schools in England. We're well aware of it. It's a key barrier. It's incumbent on us to have strategies in place. And but rest assured, yes, we are aware of it, and making sure that we are listening and keeping in touch with key folk to manage those anxieties.
Thanks very much, Paul. Any other member wanting to ask Paul a question or contribute on this item? Okay, Paul, thanks very much for your attendance today. It's much appreciated.
Okay, thank you, Chair, and thank you, members, and thank you for the invitation to be here today. And I do look forward to continued dialogue going forward and some more lessons as well, Councillor Brummer. Much appreciated in the spirit of partnership working. Thank you very much, everyone. Bye for now.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye now.
Bye.
Okay, so we'll move on to item 4, which is the Police Scotland update. And do we have Alistair Goskirk?
Yeah, good morning, Chair.
Morning, Alistair.
Hi. Good morning. If I can first place on record my thanks to the outgoing Chair for his support. It's, in fact, to everybody's support within this within the committee. I've been in post a year now. I haven't, in my own view, shirked with the challenges, but alongside me has been the Chair and every one of you. And absolutely, for the record, can I just state that God's country is the other side of Caithness, and therein we will not argue about it. Yes, I mean, conventionist, I suppose, kind of goes out the window in that the last committee, there was essentially a report to prepare and been taken out of context, and have spoken to some of you just within the last couple of weeks. Really, if it's in order with you all, I'll just try and summarise what I can in terms of the kind of police performance in the area, and then just really open it up to questions if that's in order, Chair.
Yeah, absolutely, Alistair, thank you.
So in essence, just as the last report I prepared, we drew to the end of essentially the fiscal year, and a couple of headline points to put on. The first one being around road safety, and principally the number of people killed on the roads in Caithness was dramatically down to 0, and that is always something that I would like to highlight. That said, it's something that's always a root of concern for me, not anything to be complacent about and to take for granted. We've seen a decrease in the number of detections for drink and drug driving. However, I alluded in the last meeting to what I was believing was essentially an increase in the numbers of drug driving. Moreover, because of the introduction of the new test wipes, which test positive for certain types of drug, and therefore gives us suspicion to pursue investigations further into terms of someone's suitability and fitness to drive. In recent weeks, we have seen an increase in those over and above comparing to last year. Whether I can correlate these to the recent incidents, the pandemic, the current social crisis, I can't really say. I can comment or take questions on these later. One thing I will touch on is a reduction in the levels of speeding and other associated road traffic offences. I would essentially say that whilst in the overall year they were down quite considerably, more recently they've dropped. I would argue that that's been down to our levels of enforcement as well as limited traffic volume, the total change in culture and practice over recent weeks and months. Violence disorder, it goes without saying that I speak to you all very regularly, and I've petitioned you all about my concerns about the violence levels. Look, the highlight figure, the headline figure for me is that overall violence has seen a reduction. More recently, within the last fiscal year, there was an increase in it overall, and that was going along with forecasted figures of where we're going. But post the beginning of April, it's pleasing to report that we are down essentially 26 crimes in Wick alone, and in Thurso likewise we're down 2 crimes. Arguably, we could put some of that down to the police activity, but also I would suggest to the change in behaviours. Around, moreover, antisocial behaviour and disorder, yes, we've seen an increase in that. You'll be interested in terms of the Scottish Government legislation that came in, introduced on the 16th of March around COVID legislation. So officers in Caithness applied that legislation a total of 38 times. Of that, there were 2 arrests. In terms of a split, it was roughly equal, 20 in Wick and 18 in Thurso. So those applications ranged from essentially failure to comply with the legislation, meeting up in folks' houses, and the 2 arrests were essentially, and unfortunately so, were down to a complete and utter abdication or acceptance of the new law and utter defiance of it, to be quite honest. So therefore, it's actually pleasing for me that there's only 2 arrests, and they were quite early on in the time. In recent weeks, that number, the application has tailed off. I would go as far as to suggest the reasons behind that are that we've seen normal business essentially for policing return to the community. But there is also guidance specifically for us. You've heard of the Chief Constable speak about the 4 E's, but also we've got guidance around where there is a specific crime under investigation, and there is also a breach of the COVID legislation, that the crime takes the priority. So There is also a database where other compliance issues around COVID have been recorded. It's not one that I get access to, it's one that's kept nationally. But let me give you just an anecdotal example. A person travels from Thurso, goes out to Dunnet, to the woods. Essentially in the early stages, they've gone beyond the 5 kilometre distance, out with the spirit, but generally officers have been speaking to people, but there was an obligation on us to capture that data as well. The COVID also saw an opportunity for us to really deploy our special constables, our volunteers, who I will take the opportunity to thank personally and place on record my thanks for their support. A number of them up here give up so much of their time volunteering in the community, coming out on their, while some of them were off their own work and then gradually came back to their own work as well, were giving us numerous hours a week and patrolling vast distances in terms of providing that reassurance across the community, not only in Caithness, I would hasten to add, but across other communities in the area command. So essentially, moving on, I would, another headline figure, our dishonesty crime has seen quite a reduction, very positively. Housebreakings in particular dropped nearly half compared to the year previously. Shoplifting, I'd seen a decrease, but I'll put a word of caution around that just now, that I'm starting to see a brief rise in that. Dependency, I've heard previous contributors talking about the various issues, but social vulnerability, poverty, etc., I'm starting to see a rise on that at the moment.
Alistair,
yes.
Sorry to interrupt you. I've been asked just to issue a quick reminder that the meeting is public and is being recorded. So just in case any individual is named, I'm sure you won't, but I've just been asked to issue a quick reminder to yourself and members that it's a public meeting. Okay.
Yeah, you've got my assurance, nobody will be named. So essentially that, in summary, is a quick spin round, wheel round performance, and I'm happy to take questions from you.
Thank you. I have Councillor Mackey, then Councillor Bremner.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks, Alistair, for your update. Again, as we were speaking with our educational colleagues a little bit earlier, I know policing is very, very different to what you guys would have signed up for, and I doubt that you could have ever envisaged the kind of COVID-19 response and that type of policing that's been ongoing. I would just like to put two things on record, Alistair, and one is that I thanks to the community for, on the whole, pretty good compliance, which I hope you'd like to agree from the Caithness community, which was not just kind of in the COVID environment, but also, given that there's been quite big social matters that have had ramifications around the world. We've even had protests in our part of the world that were done responsibly with social distancing and were done in a good-natured manner. And I think a lot of that goes down to the fact that we very much value our thin blue line, and we're very much able to put things in context in this part of the world, which I have actually been thankful for, because it's certainly not been the case for some of your colleagues in the rest of the UK. And I think that given what you guys have been doing throughout the pandemic and continuing to keep us safe in the middle of what is quite a frightful scenario, if I'm being perfectly honest, is very welcome. And I'm delighted to hear that you're talking about a return to normal policing, because I think as a community we are looking forward, certainly as we kind of escape COVID as slowly as that may come, and I think a return to normal policing is certainly part of that. I would just like to also say I've had a number of constituents who said that given what has been going on, the police presence has been very reassuring. And I think although you noted the 38 instances of using the COVID legislation, the fact that only 2 arrests were made does show that even, I suppose, when the guidance, let's say, has been broken, that most people have been sensible, and that is very, very welcome. And again, Alistair, just thank you for your continued updates with members. It's greatly appreciated that we have that communication Police Scotland. I think it's absolutely vital, and since you've come on board, it's been absolutely excellent that, you know, when things have been going on, we have been informed, and I think that line of communication is absolutely vital. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that. And just I would just repeat, you're absolutely right that as I see it, the majority have complied with the new restrictions. Some of it against a lot of confusion, I've fair to say, but also I think it also needs to be understood against a lot of the difficulties it was putting across, and been very embedded into all of it very recently. I saw the emergence of so many other groups, so many other volunteers, and to help overcome some of these things. So yeah, just totally echo that really the compliance, and the figures are figures. They're just a very small number compared to what we've seen.
Thank you. Councillor Bremner.
Thanks very much, Chair, and thanks very much, Alistair. It's good to have a quick overview, and certainly it's good to have you in this meeting, the first of the area committees coming back. Two things before I kick off. I hope the Chair will give me a little bit of latitude. First of all, I want to accord, Alistair, to yourself, the fact that you have, with the commitment that you've given us. I remember your first time when you gave us a personal commitment to do what you possibly could to be in touch and keep us up to date and up to speed. I can't think of a moment where we've come to you with any issue and you haven't responded within a very, very quick period of time, even if it is very late on at night and the early hours of the morning. We appreciate that you've got a difficult job to do, and sometimes having to bear in mind that there are members of council who represent the community, and to keep them in touch. You've no idea what a relief that can actually be, knowing what it is coming from you virtually straight away. And if there are people out there in the public who come to us and say, have you heard such and such, because you've no idea how gossip can get back to us so much faster than any other form of communication. But we know that within a very short period of time, if we haven't already gone to you with the query, you've actually already come to us before we get a chance to raise it. And that is a really, I have to say, that's a heartening relationship to have with somebody like yourself in the community today. And I hope that the rest of my colleagues find that being the case as well. I'm seeing a lot of them nodding there just now. So you can take it from me that we accord our appreciation for that, Alistair. Thanks very much. I'll also take the opportunity to mention to all the members that when I got elected 3 years ago, I was one of your statistics, and I keep updating everybody on how that statistical status applies to me. I can tell everybody now that I am no longer one of your statistics, and I have a lovely clean license, and at some point I'm going to waggle it in front of everybody in the camera so that you can all see it. So there you are, and if I can do it, there are many others out there that can do it too. So I just wanted to put that on record. I give everybody an update every now and then, and it's taken a little bit of time, but I'm quite proud that I managed to get there. Now, going to the actual points that you mentioned there just now, Alistair, I concur with Councillor Mackey. It's reassuring to hear that even though we were in challenging times there just now with COVID-19, and that brought so many unknowns to all agencies, we don't underestimate that. We know that at council we had no idea where we were going to be 3-4 months down the road when we were looking at what the possibilities were back in March, and that must have been a horrific kind of consideration for your own organisation and what you might have had to deal with. Not only just from the kind of antisocial behavioural aspect, but also in terms of the sympathetic community support aspect, and you've been and all the extremes of emotion that your force has to deal with when challenged with varying issues in our communities. And I have here a note that when you were saying there was only 2 arrests, but in terms of non-compliance, it was a split between Wick and Thurso. Would you have considered that without that, you would have still been in a kind of policing as normal? You mentioned that that's where you're kind of getting back to that kind of normal business. is returning. Would you have considered that maybe if it hadn't been for that COVID period, we would have had a lessening on all fronts, just as you've mentioned there just now? I just find it's such a shame that, you know, sometimes isolated incidents grab our attention, and rightly so. But some of the good news that you've given us there just now, we've said this before, when we don't get the opportunity to put the good news out there to the public, because it's very reassuring. And because they only sometimes hear of the isolated alarming incidents, but yet, as you were mentioning, and as others have mentioned, Paul mentioned it earlier on, this is a very safe place, relatively speaking, to live and bring up children. The second point that I had here, when we talk about the public compliance with the kind of 5 mile rule, is there a consideration there that within the public we recognised, and I'm not making excuses, but when governments come out with advice, it is in general for most of the public, and sometimes in the cities and the urban areas, that can affect the rural areas, maybe not as much as what we would like to intend, but the necessity is there. And when we live in a rural area, sometimes members of the public can take an interpretation that they're not actually going to do as much harm to the general public by going out with that 5 mile area, if it is just to walk on a beach or in a forest that's only just a few more miles away. And the last point that I would like to say is probably the most important point for me, and I know that Alan Tate is listening, and he's going to be addressing the committee later on, so he'll be interested in this. When we've been working with the Caithness Community Partnership, the Police Scotland are very much an integrated part of that, along with some of the other agencies, and have been through a very challenging time with COVID-19. But nevertheless, there is a lot of work going on behind the scenes, and we need to pay tribute to everybody who's working with that. And sometimes within the public domain, it takes certain instances to take their concerns to the fore. And I am talking about lots of different issues that we've been looking at over the past weeks, months, and even since I've been elected in the past years. And they are all on the radar of the Caithness Community Partnership. But they've also come up in the issues that the volunteers have been dealing with the third sector interface. And that is, as we've been dealing with the resilience programme, issues of drug and alcohol nature, social isolation, people being happy with their lot but maybe shouldn't be happy with their lot, and mental health and the effects right across the community diaspora as well. All ages have been coming to the fore recently in terms of that, and that the TSI have been looking to see how they can integrate and impart their knowledge of what they've been dealing with the Caithness Community Partnership. And that happened, the first meeting happened just a week ago past last Wednesday. And I welcome that opportunity and wondered if you had a comment to make on that, because I think that's an important consideration in going forward. I know that the council and yourselves have been dealing with issues that have been coming to our attention in particular areas like WIC. I won't mention the areas. It could actually identify individuals, but you'll know where the areas are. And it's vitally important that we get the message across to the community through the TSI and the Caithness Community Partnership that a lot of work is being done in these areas, and that we need their support, and it needs to be there as an integrated part of the work all the time, and not just when isolated incidents happen.
A number of points here, Councillor. I'll try and address them. Firstly, thank you very much for your endorsement about the support I'm giving to you all. I do, and I have invested an enormous amount of time, personal time included, in trying to build up that relationship, and equally trying to spread out to, as I see it, other influential members in the community. And for example, a recent event in Wick where I was, including yourselves, but also Wick Community Council and the chair, and the secretary, and I see my reach going a bit beyond. So thank you for that. Coming to one of your points about the legislation and the difficulty in policing it, I probably will, maybe this is a personal opinion, I dare say when Scottish Government were having to introduce what they did, the difficulties they were faced with trying to lay things out and to put it into perspective, and arguably, yes, in more remote communities, do they feel the same vulnerability or risk? I would turn that round, and that, let's say in the beginning, did we all know what we were faced with and what those risks were? And the approach we were taking was to support that public health prevention and so on and so forth. But I would contend by saying that the people in the main that we were dealing with were absolutely fine, and we faced no challenge, and really an understanding and acceptance. Yes, for the local community, concerns for folk who were blatantly travelling into the community from out with, and I can understand that, and that has, and in many respects, does pose us some difficulties. I think that I would suggest that one of my successes, albeit small, was in coming to you all those months ago and really becoming heartened by the way that the committee were taking on board what I was saying. You're absolutely right, Councillor, about all the influencing factors, all the connections as to why I was seeing our levels of violence and criminality increasing and escalating. That I think we were in a really good place. I think there were people looking in at this community up here. They were looking at policing, they were looking at the partnership, they were looking at the joint working in terms of where we're going, and we've just been hit with an absolute roadblock with what has happened. And I'm encouraged with some of the conversations recently that there is a desire, a drive to get those things going. I've heard about the Icelandic model, I've heard about the joint working. But can I say just in finally, we've seen over recent weeks a number of unfortunate cases where there's been loss of life, and without a shadow of a doubt, it's, you know, mental health has been attributed, and that for me is a particular driver to just keep working with you all, and I'll just say this now, that scrutiny can be difficult, but I welcome the scrutiny I get from this committee. I welcome the openness, the transparency, but at the same time, I firmly believe in the journey that I've started, that working with yourselves, we will make inroads into the concerns that you raised. And they're absolutely right, Councillor, that I see those themes in a lot of the issues that your police officers in this community are dealing with on a day-to-day basis. I hope that answers some of what your points.
Okay, thanks very much. I now have Councillor Rees and Councillor Rosie, followed by Councillor Mackay. Councillor Rees.
Yeah, thank you, Nicola. I'll be as quick as I can. Lots of important points. Alistair, good to see you. Thank you for your kind words. Three things very quickly, although they're all big topics in their own right. First of all, your words about the special constabulary were very well put. This was something, just to be slightly abrasive, that in the early years of Police Scotland, right across Scotland, the numbers of specials, as you all know, fell dramatically. It had been neglected, but Mr. Livingston, the new Chief Constable, is really trying hard to rebuild the special force, especially in remote and rural areas. As you all know, the special constabulary perform, they're just there, and if you need them, they'll drop everything and do. And I'm aware of some of the work they've done during the COVID emergency, and it's way beyond the call of duty, long, late hours, which a lot of the community may not be fully aware of how much they've done. The second one, and I really am going to be brief on this because it's a particular pet hobby horse that I'm going to be boring people with for the next couple of years, so folks, you're on warning. I do feel, and I've mentioned this elsewhere in the council recently, and it's difficult for Police Scotland, but I'm interested in the environmental side of things and the issue of wild camping. I saw some social media stuff over the weekend about folk doing wild camping a long way from Caithness at the Commander Memorial at Spearn Bridge, and the mess that was left behind. Won't go into details. Absolutely disgusting. You know, an area that a monument that's held in considerable respect for all the right reasons. I feel the right to roam legislation was very good and well intended, but somehow the wild camping has taken over. It's just something I'd be interested, not now, I'll still be interested to know what the police feel, what powers they do have, and whether these could be improved. Thirdly, and probably more importantly right now, you touched at the end of your comments on mental health, and it's always, in fact, it's almost impossible to get exactly the right words, but I'm going to give it a go, because one comment I saw on social media just last week was somebody commenting that they had a health emergency at a weekend, and I paraphrase, but the quote basically was, as far as they were concerned, the only people who were available to help were Police Scotland out of office hours at the weekend. And I mean, I really have very strong views on this. Police officers get a modicum of training in mental health, but they are not, repeat, not medical experts. And it's easy to get something wrong, albeit completely unintentionally. And I would like to ask you, seeing as you said correctly, I would like to think that this committee has never held back from discussing these matters. Whether or not you feel that comment from that person, you know, that the police really sometimes, not always, are the only agency able to help right there and then, perhaps at 1 o'clock on a Saturday morning, what your experience has been. And I am thinking particularly if there's assistance that is needed from medical experts at New Craigs, how easily or otherwise your experience and your time back in the county has been of getting help in that area. Thank you, Chair. I've tried to be brief on these very important subjects. Thank you.
Chair, likewise, I'll try and keep my response concise. I'll just, in relation to the mental health first, and the new chair and I have had a brief discussion round about how I see things going forward. Look, let me just start by giving a very quick anecdote to a personal experience I had not that long ago with an individual who had called for help from health. He had called out of hours. The call had been picked up. The call taker turned to someone very to the ideal person that could offer that help, and the response was, go to the police, we only work Monday to Friday 9 to 5. What that started was essentially police officers going first and foremost to try and just check that this gentleman was okay. The gentleman in question learned the police were looking for him, took fright because he thought he was in trouble. Now, to cut a long story short, we eventually tracked him down, not after causing a great deal of worry and so on and so forth. But his plea to me was that it wasn't the police he was needing; it was help from health. Now, but I'll go as far as to say I realise the challenges and difficulties everybody's in. I have to be very careful and considered in what I say and suggest, but I would go as far as to say, and I think it's a very opportune point that the Chair's made, with the current pandemic crisis, our area of Police Scotland has introduced a new command and control model. This was always coming to us. It was just brought in earlier because there was an opportunity. I can't give you absolute affirmative data, but there's a suggestion that the officers in this area are actually now dealing with more urgent calls. So the command and control process now looks at what is priority and immediate. It's based on, they do very quick assessments from the call, the minute the call is answered. The calls are routed through different aspects of our call handling and our control system, but there is a suggestion that we're dealing with more and more social individual vulnerability calls and what they ever considered we might. So I would leave that one with you. I think in drawing this point to a close, I think I would just welcome the invite from the chair to be part of that wider discussion about how I see some of the areas. For me, it's that respect of my opinion, and I thank you all for that. I think there's an opportunity to work alongside what we were doing with the violence, and it looks at the Caithness community as a whole, and we take from there. I'll be honest with you, I don't think we're going to solve the problem overnight. I think it just needs the right people talking about it, and in essence, your forum campaigning for us.
Chair, could I come back very briefly with your?
Yeah, that's fine, Matthew.
Thank you. It's so important. Thank you, Alistair. You've put that as well as you can. And I know when I was in your shoes, you do have to be. It's very difficult when you have to answer these questions live and you're restricted in what you can say. But in my new role, I am less restricted than a police officer, so which I welcome. I may usually be quiet, but I'm quite happy to speak my mind. And I personally think, and I will finish after this, you said yourself there is anecdotal information or evidence that the police are handling more and more of these medical type calls primarily, and I think you're nodding your head. Some of them may have an element of criminality, but surely, and I know every police officer would agree with me, person's health comes first and perhaps some minor misdemeanor they might or more probably have not committed. And I think there's a structural problem here. The police have always had a can-do approach and have willingly taken on pretty much anything they're asked to do because that's the nature of the service. And whether it was Northern Constabulary or Police Scotland, I don't think that's really changed very much. But the point is, as I said, police officers are not medical experts. And I just ask really myself the question, are the police the people who should just be routinely given these calls, or should the health service be taking on, if the call handler recognises there's no crime and it's a health issue, why are the police having to continue to help these people when, as we know full well, they are not experts in mental health? And that's really, I think, the key problem. The police are simply taking on more and more of these concerns. If it turns into a missing person, yes, it's a police matter. But when people are needing help, I just ask the question, are Police Scotland correct? I mean, the police will always take it on and they'll very seldom say no to something, but it's the good nature of the police that is almost perhaps the system is almost taking advantage of. I'll stop there, but thank you for letting me back in.
Councillor, I would just add, that our new command and control system is evolving, and within that, I know that triaging and directing to the appropriate agency partner in the first instance is part of that aim. And I would hope and I hold some confidence in the system that that's where we'll see it go. I would like to just kind of end by saying, as a police officer, and I think you put it more eloquently than I can, but as officers, we will do almost everything we can to help anybody. I do accept about the training and our abilities in that regard, but we will do our utmost to try and keep, and it's an easy statement to roll off, but to keep people safe and fundamentally, we see, particularly our place in the community up here, and there's a I think there are reports that get back to me also about how the officers deal with people individually when they're in crisis. And I think it has to be recognised that the community do see us very much in that as someone to turn to now. So I would, as much as I can struggle with the conflict about what we're in, at the same time, I have confidence that we're doing what we can for people in the community. We're doing our very best to try and help people in crisis. And there's just one further point. I would also say that the other side that's important for me is also the effect it's having on my officers and my staff, my colleagues up here as well. So happy to have these discussions kind of beyond this forum, but I thank you for your comments, your support, all of you, with this topic, which is not easy.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Rosie.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Alistair. Always good to see you. I think just a comment when you mentioned COVID-19 legislation and compliance. You made a point that there was a lot of uncertainty just at the beginning of the pandemic, and I remember I was doing some research to see what we could expect. And something that came across was that during World War II, crime statistics rose by 3,000%. I found that difficult to believe, but it scared me at the time. But, you know, there in itself, I think we've got to recognise that and just what we've achieved. So congratulate Police Scotland and community in general and what we have achieved. I touched already, and you mentioned Icelandic model. It's just worth remembering again, just before the pandemic and the lockdown started, we had a seminar in Thurso where we discussed whether we should introduce the Icelandic model in Caithness, and there was a widespread agreement to do that, and I look forward to progressing that. But I think we've got to recognise that the Icelandic model is all about prevention, and I don't think there's any doubt that, and indeed I think there's a desire from the public now for us to address the ongoing issues. Prevention is one thing, it's working with children, but we know what the issues are, and we touched on unfortunate events recently in Caithness. So here's a thought for you. I'll be interested to get your thoughts, Alistair. And this relates partly to some of the comments that Matthew's made too. I think the responsibility to address these issues lies with four bodies: Police Scotland, NHS Highland, Highland Council and the community itself. I think the answers are in amongst there. And I would point to something I'm sure everyone in Caithness will understand. We all went through a process of redesigning health and social care, and it was a fantastic exercise. We were in a difficult position when it started. We went through that with various bodies involved, and more importantly, the community, and we found answers. So I think we've got an opportunity now. I had a discussion this morning with Highland Council health officials just prior to this meeting on how we could tackle that. And general agreement on what I mentioned, those four groups being involved. But the key thing in the Caithness redesign process was that we had an independent facilitator, and he was able to shine a light on each of the parties involved. So health professionals, communities, councillors, and that was able to draw things out and reach a conclusion. So I'm going to think about how I propose that via a platform that is Highland Council. I would just be interested to get your thoughts, because I do not think that any one person from those are involved in those groups, so Police Scotland, NHS, Highland Council, could effectively manage that. I do think an independent facilitator would work well. So just interested to get your thoughts on that, Alistair. Thank you.
Councillor, yeah, if I've understood your question correctly, if I can just answer it maybe in this format, that I reiterate in many respects that I do not see that policing and the criminal justice forum is often the best way of dealing with some of the consequences of, or sorry, they're not the best. So there are consequences fallout from vulnerability and isolation and mental health and so on and so forth. One of those consequences can be criminality. I don't think the criminal justice system, and this is a personal opinion, does not deal with the key problem, and I think you're absolutely right. I am filled with optimism from this area that there is a drive to do something about it. If I can just refer to, I speak regularly with my fellow inspectors who are responsible for areas, and I talk about the scrutiny I have, but the support and the optimism, but also the drive to improve things and to overcome some of the challenges. And I'm not sure they want to swap places with me, but if for other reasons, but they envy in many respects what we have up here and what we're trying to do. And I touched at the recent community partnership about the opportunity to be pioneering in the way we do things. And I think, but coming back to your final point, I think these 4 partners that you're talking about there, Council, absolutely right. Get them around the table and start to let's have open, frank, honest conversations and come up with ideas.
So, Nicola, just a brief point, if you don't, somebody I forgot to mention. Alistair, thank you for your response. One of the interesting conversations I had last week, Alistair, was that our chief executive had conversations with, I've forgotten his name, is it Mr. Livingston, Chief Constable of Police Scotland, and there's a recognition of what's happening in the Highlands. So I was also pleased last week, in amongst all the unfortunate events in Caithness, to be invited to participate in a meeting in Inverness. And for me, it was a hallelujah moment, because I have consistently said that we are not dealing with an issue that's solely related to Caithness. It's a local, national, global issue. I'm absolutely delighted that we now got recognition that we need to address things in the Highlands, and I think that makes things so much easier. So thank you for your points, Alistair. Thanks.
Okay, Councillor Mackay.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, good to see us moving forward. I can see that happening right now as a traffic warden is outside this window in Caithness House. So that's a good step forward. Alistair, good to see you. I missed your call when you were in Wick the other day. But however, just a wee topic here. We've been having homeless victims here in the town of Wick here. And as a concern to some of the constituents, they just wondered if Police Scotland did a risk assessment on these people and did background research on them before they were allocated houses in Wick. Just a quick question there, Alistair. And the other question I'd like to say, I noticed a highlight in the P&J recently over a weekend when the phase 1 was just about to finish. You had 10 causes of drunk driving there in the Highlands, 10. Now, was that because you had a summer campaign on the go, or was it just some isolated incidents, or was it in any way reflecting the amount of alcohol that is for sale and on the go right now? Alistair?
Councillor S, if I can start by answering the second point first. So there is now, just started last week, there is a current festive drug drive campaign ongoing. So the figures that were advertised or published recently are not part of that campaign. I suppose in essence that what we are seeing is a spike or an increase once again in drunk. And I've highlighted earlier in my report to you about drug driving. I think it's fair to say that there's been a lot more proactivity around policing of the issue. It has to be said, support from within the community who are calling in and reporting that. So, it must be said that it still remains a priority of us. We still dedicate resources to it, but within the communities, it's still a very unacceptable trait and behaviour and presents an unacceptable risk to the community. So we're responding to that, Councillor. So I hope that answers that second part of your question. As regards homelessness, so I'll be careful how I say this, but in essence, I know that we do work with colleagues and our partners in housing. There have been people come into the community recently that have given or drawn cause for concern within the community, folk who have travelled, who've quite clearly breached regulations, who go as far as to say have been reported for that. In terms of risk assessment, we do work with housing, and housing, if they're part of this, might be able to add some more context to you, but we do share information. There is that information sharing protocol as well. So I'll go as far as to say, yes, we do contribute. Whether that provides a satisfaction or reassurance to your constituents, I can also appreciate that there be individual concerns, but we do what we can there. I hope probably sounds a bit of a woolly answer to you, but in essence,
No, that's
Right.
fine, Alistair. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, Councillor Brimmer, you wanted to come back in?
Yes, thanks for allowing me to come back in. It's very much appreciated. I'm going to be quite blunt, actually. I've heard a lot of the contributions in this this discussion, and all very valuable and very valid contributions. But I have to say to Councillor Rees, we've been talking about this for years. This is not a surprise, and fully appreciate the point that Councillor Rees is making to Alistair Goskirk there just now, and that Councillor Rees will have had underpinning knowledge from his former position within Police Scotland, but these items are not these issues are not a surprise to us, and they haven't been since I was elected. The Caithness partnership and all the community partnerships are there, just as Councillor Rosie said, and 4 of the partners in that are Police Scotland, the NHS, the council, and the community, amongst others. So there is a vehicle that's already been provided to us there. But and that's why I'm glad again that Alan Tate is here, because otherwise maybe Alan might not be hearing some of the discussion that we are having right now. And that is where we, through the TSI currently, have been facing some of the issues that I mentioned when I first talked about this in this debate, where volunteers have been finding out that in our communities, it's a bigger awareness that they've got about mental health, drug and alcohol, social isolation, people happy with their lot where they shouldn't be, etc., etc., etc. And I think that we now have to make sure that when we go forward with this, that the partnership has to be a little bit self-analytical. If the agencies that are coming to the table have got problems with being the folks that are lumbered with the job of doing that are lumbered with the responsibility of doing the job of everybody, because nobody else is open at that time. And I'm talking about Police Scotland, where I've been in their car and I've been there going about as an observer, and I have found the jobs of the officers is to turn up, find out what it is that they've actually got to deal with. Then if it's drugs, believe you me, you can be assured virtually within a very short period of time, if you're going out as an observer, you will find that there's a drug issue they get called to. They may have to go to the hospital, and then the NHS have a look at it within the confines of it in the hospital. After that, it's back to the police, and because there's no support there for that individual, and often, as was the case when I was out with them, they were put back home, and you had no idea what was going to be happening to that person or that individual in the state that they were in until maybe the following morning when somebody gets in contact with them. These instances are known to the partnership, and they're known to the agencies. So we need to quit dancing around about it and actually start addressing the issues that we know are facing the partnership right in front of them. And that means that these organisations have to take a look at what they are providing, and where it fails to provide, how do we get that? How do we make that better? It can't be within the confinements of their organisations' operations right now, when we just then put it back on the community. It has. We have to be a lot more sincere with this. And I hope, Chair, that when you mentioned there about looking at the action plan for Ward 2, Ward 3, and then for the full county, that this most definitely will be going on to that action plan. Thank you. You don't need to respond to that, Alistair. Thanks.
Okay, thanks very much, members. Is anybody else looking to come in? I'm just checking to see if I can see any more hands. I think we've had a really good discussion of the issues today, and Alistair, thanks very much for giving your time so generously, and we look forward to taking many of those issues forward, probably particularly the drug and mental health issues, which I know are foremost in most of our minds, and we'll look to pick up with you further offline and see what we can take forward together.
Yes, and just finally, Chair, if I can wish you well in the future in your new responsibilities. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Alistair. Okay, members, will we move on to item 5, which is the COVID-19 response? And part 1 is the update from Highland Council, and I think Alex is going to provide that.
Can you hear me now, members?
Yeah, we've got you now, Alex.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Sorry, I had modern technologies and myself are not good bedfellows. You should have the first page of a PowerPoint presentation that you should be looking at Caithness Committee, Highland Council COVID Community Response. Is that correct? Yeah,
yep.
Good. Okay,
Yeah.
That's fine. Right. And just to keep the topic of the meeting going, I'm addressing you as a Caithness from Real God's County.
Oh, well done.
Okay. Right.
Brave man.
Ditto.
Right. The establishment of the Humanitarian Assistance Centres, or HACs, were established as part of any emergency response where coordinated support for peoples affected by an emergency is provided. The guidance for HACs dates back to 2009 and was actually written more to be a physical location for people in need of support to attend. And as you can imagine, this had to be adapted for response to the COVID-19, as people were required to self-isolate rather than congregate. Shielding were the people who were advised that they had been identified by their GPs and clinicians because of their health conditions made them extremely vulnerable to COVID-19, and this included patients in 7 clinical categories of need. Initially, shielding meant that people were unable to leave their homes except for medical appointments and should socially distance from other members of their household. This, as you probably remember, was for an initial period of 12 weeks. However, this had been extended until at least the end of July, but some possibilities were allowed for them to leave home for exercise, provided that they practiced safe distancing and obviously the hygiene aspect as well. Next sheet, please, Anne. The COVID helpline. The helpline was led by the service centre team of the Highland Council, but it was also supported by a range of other Highland Council staff who were redeployed to support this. The general helpline, which you may be familiar with, the 0300 303 1362 number was issued, and there was also a specific line for shielding patients issued at that time, and that number was 01349 886669. The service centre had a peak in calls during April time, which coincided with the issue of shielding letters to the groups, which came initially from Dr. Catherine Calderwood, who was the Chief Medical Officer at that time. And then there was a second letter issued by John Swinney, the Deputy First Minister. The Council set up 10 local community hubs, with the ward managers tasked with setting these up and running the hubs, following liaison with key staff about where these hubs were to be located. We were looking to bring in staff on board to form the hub's management team and also to support distribution. These hubs were set up where we took in all the necessary steps, ensuring all the Scottish Government's advice and directives were being adhered to. We also had invaluable support from our fleet teams, our environmental health officers and our catering staff. There was a Highland-wide approach taken to hubs that were very much tailored to the needs of the local communities they served, and we took account of local geographies and local challenges. And I'll talk more about the Caithness hub shortly. There was also a distribution hub set up which coordinated the distribution of food supplies which came into the Highlands from, I think it was primarily around the Aberdeen area, and food was received into the hub in Inverness from Fairshare, and the staff in the hub in Inverness bagged the food into parcels, and these parcels were then delivered out across the Highlands to the 10 hubs I've talked about already. There then was the virtual hub. The virtual hub was led by our policy and reform team, and again we had support from deployed council staff. In addition to the shielding team, the virtual hub acted as a liaison and support to the helplines and the hub staff, and they gathered information on primarily on all the local community groups out there who rallied to the cause. Could you go to screen 4, please, on? Thank you. The figures you see here are from across the Highland wide. Much of the sport was ongoing. Currently, across the Highland, there are just under 300 households being supported with ongoing food provision. Referrals came in from, well, there was self-referrals to folk phoning the helplines. We had referrals come in from the NHS Adult Social Care, the Children and Families teams, referrals from our own housing teams, and referrals from our own welfare support teams. One of the interesting issues I did discover was that I did have an actual spike in referrals came into the hub in Wick. And when I investigated, I found out that when the shielding letters were issued, the actual recipients of the shielding letters had to actually respond to that letter, whether they wanted support or didn't want support. So there was quite a lot of folk, I can only speak here from the Caithness perspective, a lot of people didn't actually respond at all. So we had 2 of our girls who were service point girls, local Caithness girls, actually were asked to phone up folk who did not respond from Ward 2 and Ward 3. And the responses they got were actually quite eye-opening, because as you can imagine, quite a lot of the responses they did get were from folks saying, well, you know, we don't really need help. We're well looked after. You know, I'm sure there are folk worse off than we are, which, as you can imagine, is quite a heartwarming sort of response to get on the call. And again, because the girls were from Caithness and had the Caithness twang, there was a fair degree of chit-chat back and forth to these individuals who did not respond. So we did get a spike at that time, and I think we were fortunate enough that happened in the county. But I do understand as well that that response was actually carried out through the whole Highlands. But I think we're fortunate that we had our Caithness girls phoning our Caithness people. I don't want to appear to be racist or anything or that, but that went down well. The other responses we did have were rooted in from the virtual hub, and we did respond directly or refer on to welfare support and adult care. Can we move on to number 5, please? The local arrangements now in the county. The Wick hub was set up at the Wick High School, and at the start we were receiving on average about 5 or 6 referrals a day from the virtual hub. Initially we were available 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. at the very start, but that has gone down till 9 till 5. Quite a few of the inquiries were actually people just wanted somebody to phone them up and to reassure them that everything was going to be okay, and there was help out there. Approximately 90% of all the referrals that were actually came through the hub, the Wick hub, were passed on to the local community groups. And I can just say that without that support from the local groups, we could well have been looking at quite a big challenge. I think I've had it on record before as saying that the response from the local groups was so humbling. It was it really it was bringing a tear to my eye how these groups were responding to what was actually landing on their desks. From numbers perspective, there was about 260 cases came to the hub since the middle of April, and like I say, approximately 90% of that cases were dealt with by local community groups. The hub also, we were asked to look after or to be on alert to deliver water to folk on private water supply should the reserves run low. And this water would have been supplied by Scottish Water, but we haven't had any cases of that at all. Can I go on to screen 6, please? Again, as I say, the support provided by the community groups was very humbling, and without their role, I don't know what I would be reporting to you today. The emergency liaison groups of the ELG were convened on a weekly basis, and that was, as it's a Caithness and Sutherland ELG, it was Caithness and Sutherland responders that were in that ELG, but predominantly we spoke about Caithness, and I know that the police and Scottish Water, SEPA, there was all the usual attendees at the ELG group, and although we didn't really have to man up or go out and help. It was interesting that we were getting feedback from all these groups, and of course the local community groups had set up a Zoom meeting through the invaluable help provided by Alan Tate, the Caithness voluntary group, and these Zoom meetings were very well attended, and I think the local community, again, attending these groups just showed that the spirit in the county and how the county all pulled together. I can't stress that enough. It was quite, as I say, I'll use the word again, it was very humbling, and I'm eternally grateful to them all for how they have responded. Number 7, please, Anne. These are some of the figures now on a county perspective. From my own point of view as the hub manager, at one point we were supporting 5 households a week with food. Predominantly these were households who had signed up for the Scottish Government parcels through the shielding letters, but through one issue or another, they hadn't received the food parcels on the Wednesday as they should have. So the hub stepped in and supplied that food. And as we speak, we're currently down to 2 households we'll be supporting this week. But again, I would anticipate that these households will be receiving their normal Scottish Government food parcels, if not this week, most certainly by next week. Could I go on to number 8, please, Anne? Yeah, the key learning points from my perspective as A, the hub manager, and B, I suppose, as your ward manager, is the excellent community response. I think excellent doesn't do it justice, how the response came about. The effort from the voluntary sector, the TSI, is immense. I can't stress that and say that enough. It's just an unbelievable. It's not even a strong enough word to use. The partnership working, as was already mentioned, the Caithness Community Partnership has had a meeting, and I may be talking at a school here, but I think that the feeling is that the community groups out there now have the drive to drive the community partnership. The hub system, quick response, where no other mechanism was in place. Well, again, I agree there, but I think again we had a few weeks before we actually got any food supplies in, and again, I'm not labouring the point here, but the community stood up and filled in for what we should have been doing. The willingness for everybody to engage, yes, there's no doubt that happened, and the legacy for future community resilience activity. Well, I think because this is unprecedented, and as somebody said before, we weren't working off any blueprints here. We were flying by the seat of our pants, and I think that now that we've got, as I would say, we've got a recipe, we need to keep using that recipe and enhancing it as we go forward. The challenge is, well, yes, we have a wide geographic area, but it was quickly established when this pandemic kicked off that the county was pretty well served by the community groups. I think the gaps were pretty quickly identified by the hub and also the local members that we were looking for support in Caithness West area and the Hawkirk area, and the Thurso Community Development Association stepped in and helped out. So yes, they along with all the groups, I can't talk highly enough of what they've actually done. Can I move on to the next screen, please? I can't really add any more to what's actually there. I think probably the biggest is there the change to do things differently, which I think has already been spoken about, or some of the members have mentioned already, and certainly to build on the community confidence. I think the community are on our side, and we need to keep that there. We need to keep the community very much involved as we go forward. Next screen, please, Anne. Again, as I was saying, that there's nothing more I can really add to that, although I'm aware that there is a council review going on, and that probably the management of the local hubs by the ward management team will be phased out while we get put on to our day job, for want of a better term. Could I have the next screen, please, Anne? And as you'll see, I've lost a number of screens here. Just bear with me a second, please. Yeah, these are the numbers for the Highland. The volunteers. We did actually have more volunteers than we needed, which, from my perspective, as from manning the hub, was we didn't need so many volunteers because the local groups stood up to the plate. But I do know that there were two young guys from Highland helped the food bank in Thurso, and I know that the food bank were very grateful for all the help that the Highland staff gave them. Next screen, please, Anne. Again, we're now more into the numbers and the number of groups in Caithness and what these groups provided to us, or for us, we're able to provide to the community, particularly around shopping and collecting shopping. I would like to name all the groups and all the people involved, but I think time is an enemy here. But certainly, particularly, I would like to mention the Caithness Voluntary Group who pulled all this together, and particularly Alan Tate, who did a sterling job. And I know we're going to hear from Alan shortly, but I'd like to record my own thanks for all he's done and all he's providing, all the help he's actually given me as ward manager and as the hub manager. I don't know where I'd be without him. Next screen, please. Here we'll see the monies that have been allocated throughout the Highlands. I can't add any more to that. It's just for your response. I will share the PowerPoint with you, the members, later. Could we go on to the next one, please, Anne? These are more the figures for the county. As you'll see, 25 separate awards, a total 156,000. The COVID awards, the HTSI, Responsive Recovery Resilience, this SSEN, and supporting communities. Next screen, please, on. And then we had the business grant support, which I'm not sure if you're familiar with, but the only figures that are missing from the previous scheme were the funds actually, the local groups were allocated from external funders, for example, from wind farms. I don't have that information. And this screen does not show the monies from that were allocated by DSRL to the Chamber of Commerce there was 2 awards of 100,000 given out to the Chamber of Commerce for allocation. The first allocation, there was 56 applicants and the 47 groups were supported. And on the second tranche, 90 applications and 78 were supported. And all that 200,000 has been allocated. That was just confirmed by the Chamber to me on Friday. Next screen, please. Yeah, okay, well that's me finished now. I don't know if you want to come to me with questions first, or do you want to hear from Alan and then perhaps questions to us both? I'll leave that up to the chair. Thank you.
Thanks very much for that, Alex. I think probably there's going to be a large amount of overlap between your comments and that of Alan's, so I think it makes sense to move on to Alan's presentation now and then have comment at the end.
Thank you.
Okay, Alan.
Yeah, thanks very much, Nicola. Yeah, I'll just kind of give you the story of the resilience effort as I saw it anyway. It goes back, I think, on the 15th of March, I was actually travelling home from Edinburgh and was told about a Facebook page that had been set up called Deliver for Caithness. So some of you might have seen that at the time, and it was very popular. Obviously, people were having concerns about people having to self-isolate, unable to get shopping or medicines. So very well meaning, but it was going to need organisation. So I just put a post up saying, great, but could we maybe hold on until we see what the statutory organisations are planning. So that week, commencing the 16th of March, I was just trying to establish what was being planned. There was mentions of ELG meetings. I wasn't really sure what that was until Alec gave us a bit more information just a few minutes ago. There was encouragement to sign up to the Red Cross, but in Caithness, there's no active network of Red Cross that I'm aware of. There were Highland Council emails going out to community councils, but again, many of the community councils have limited capacity before the crisis, and a percentage of their members were elderly and not best placed to help. So that week went on. Julie, Mark and myself at CBG, we tried to identify a lead organisation in each of the 12 community council areas. So we were phoning round that whole week, and by the end of the week, I think we were near enough there to identifying an organisation. The plan was that these organisations would agree to provide shopping, medicines to people who needed help. In some cases, it was straightforward. PPP in Wick, the Beath Centre, Thurso Development Trust covering Thurso. In other areas, we had a combination of groups, such as the Development Trust and the Community Council in both Sinclair Bay and Dunnet and Canisby. In Martin, it was the local shop and the Community Council. In Castletown, it was the Free Church and the Community Council. So it was a mixture of groups, but I think it was important that they knew their community the best. You know, they knew the people. Like a special mention to Heather and Claire at Caithness Community Connections, a relatively new group who I think have done a great job out in Leicester in tough circumstances. We had an issue, as Alex says. We were struggling to identify lead groups in Halkirk and Caithness West. So thankfully, Thurston Development Trust agreed to cover those areas, so that was great. Tannock Community Council, as you know, is not active at the moment. So Thrumpster Community Development Association stepped up to cover the whole Tannock area. So again, that was superb. So that took us that was by about the 23rd of March. We all got together for a Zoom meeting. Must have been about 30 people in the call. In addition to reps from all the groups, we had local councillors, Pat and Grant from the Food Bank, Alex, obviously the ward manager, Martin Thompson from High, June from Doonry. We all thought we had a plan, this was going to be fine, and then within an hour I think Boris had announced the lockdown and we were all, everything was up in the air again. But so these weekly meetings continued along with plenty of emails. This allowed us all just to share information, ideas, and try to solve some of the problems. And like as Alex says, lots of partnership working. Like at CVG, we've been trying to keep an eye on what's happening in the Highlands with our kind of sister organisations, see what's happening nationally, trying just to share best practice, whatever we could pick up at the time. But we needed to make sure that the work with the groups, that the work they were doing was keeping themselves safe, keeping everybody else safe, not adding to the problem. So lots of procedures were developed. Again, I say a lot of sharing of information. I along with Alec, can't speak highly enough of all the groups and all, of course, of all the volunteers within those groups. Tremendous job. Leaflets and posters were prepared, as we knew not everyone was on social media. A lot of the support advertising was going out on social media, but we knew that wasn't going to catch everybody. So the growth obviously got involved, but we had leaflets, posters, hand sanitizer was distributed, activity boxes have been widely distributed to kids and to older people. Books and jigsaws have been shared to try to improve well-being. At CVG, we've worked with all the groups to help them obtain some of that funding that Alex just outlined. As things have developed, some of the groups have started following Dunbeath's lead in providing cooked food, and that is still ongoing. We've had various people join us at the Zoom meetings to support the work. Isabel from CAB, Trudy from the Chamber, Arlene NHS, various others have come in and out, just to help us as we kind of went on in this journey. Looking forward, we are still having resilience meetings now, fortnightly, and these meetings are keeping an eye on the ongoing resilience effort, also looking more at recovery. We've collected a lot of the issues that have been identified and are starting to get these into a document, and we'll work with everyone and anyone to try to come up with solutions and prepare for any future challenges, such as the furlough coming to an end in October. We're looking to encourage the resilience groups to work with the people that they've been supporting to increase their independence. For some people that won't be such a big issue as the lockdown eases, but others will need more support. And CVG will try to support that process. I think our first piece of work will be to try to establish what support is out there and how to contact the different agencies, because it's, even for me that's worked in this sector for 3 or 4 years, I don't know what's all available and what's not available and how to contact them. So we need to get that information a bit clearer. We're fortunate that we have from today the Aspiring Community team starting work. So their role is to work with the community partnership to tackle inequalities. So what could be social isolation, mental health, poverty, drug and alcohol issues, transport. I think all of these issues I expect them to get involved with. Just to finish off, I actually had a discussion with Murray Wiley at HGSI on Saturday. Obviously, everybody's aware of the news. The last few weeks have been hard in the county. Just to see how we can develop a third sector to develop capacity around mental health. And I don't know how this will look like, but we're aiming to try to do something. I'm aware of the struggles to get support for mental health issues, so it's certainly something that we'll be looking at in the next few weeks and see if we can pull people together. And I say always happy to work with anybody that's happy to work with us. So I think that's all I've got for just now.
Thanks very much, Alan and Alex. I'm conscious that this is a big item and a lot of us are going to have questions on it. So if you don't mind, I'm going to propose a very quick comfort break before we go into questions. It's 12:26 now. If we come back at past maybe, so just 5 minutes. Sorry, Raymond. Yeah. Okay. Reconvene in 5 minutes. Okay, I think everybody is back. Yeah, looks like most of us are back now, so we'll move on to questions for Alex and Alan. And I've got Councillor Bremner first.
Thanks, Chair. It's not so much questions, but I think it would be remiss of me if we covered this topic without acknowledging some of the things that Alex and Alan have said. But I will have one question at the end. I'll mention it just now, and that is to Alan in particular, but I'd welcome Alex's response as well. What are the opportunities that we believe that are going to come out of the past 4 months in terms of the provision that we've recognised in Caithness of the third sector interface? So that's to both of you. It really is quite an overarching question. I'm not so sure that I don't know quite a lot of the answers myself. I've already reflected on some of them in the previous items, and I knew that Alan was in on this, and that's why I particularly mentioned that it might be of interest to him to see what he thinks, because we've formed that kind of consideration at the TSI of which I've been a part. Which leads me on to acknowledging the fantastic work of Alan and Alec. I've been listening in on in fact, I've been taking part in the third sector interface meetings every week. In fact, it's gotten to the point where Alan has, I was beginning to wonder if Alan was actually living in my kitchen. I kept on coming through the door and his face was on the screen. But that is testament to the level of work that this county has managed to come up with during this period of time. I think it would be remiss of us as well not to acknowledge that not just in Scotland, the Highland third sector interface has been probably leading the charge, but within Highland Council itself, it's well recognised that Caithness has just blown everybody away. I think that that's a really important point to make and to acknowledge at a meeting such as the Caithness Area Committee. It's testament to the will of the people, to the social cohesion and integration that we have in Caithness. We might find things difficult in our communities from time to time, but you know this, we get a challenge like this and it blows everybody's socks off just exactly how we react to it. It's a wonderful thing that Alan is saying there just now. I'm seeing a lot of heads nodding. It's a wonderful thing to say, Alan, that in March, when Deliver for Caithness was seen online, that by the time that the hub got up and running and Alex was already at the meetings, and every week we were all updating the progress and the multiple actions that most of the volunteer groups had already put in place. But by the time that an organisation like the Highland Council and the size of the organisation that it is managed to come on board with a local presence, in so much as it was delivering food parcels through the shielding for folks with the Scottish Government letters, we were already there. And I think that Alex will say that he already said he found it humbling when he came in and found that by the time that happened, we were already providing so many services, it was unbelievable. I think the other thing that is important to to acknowledge is the level of confidence and assurance that brought to our residents in Caithness, whether they were isolating, whether they were shielding, whether they were in a vulnerable category, whether they had underlying symptoms, or whether they just needed that reassurance that there was support there in whatever form they needed it. It was there, and it was there within a very small period of time. I also want to acknowledge and thank very much everybody who was not part of the organisations that were making a material contribution to our communities through the TSI, but those who were doing their own thing and by hook or by crook they were managing to support these organisations and the communities through other means. And we have to take our hat off to the fact that from point one, we had people falling over themselves to make hand sanitizer available absolutely everywhere. We had distilleries, we had the people it was unbelievable. And then it became a charitable thing, and we know of people who were getting hand sanitizer right throughout the Highlands, because Caithness had upped its ante right at the beginning, at March and beginning of April. We had no shortage of it. It was brilliant. People getting 3D printers and funding becoming available for 3D printers and materials, and we were going about getting acetate sheets, and everything was coming together. Anybody who said that they needed masks, we were managing to give out funding so that people could make face covers way back at the beginning of April, and only now the Scottish Government has actually brought it out as mandatory as of next Monday to wear in shops, when we've had people here manufacturing it since April. So the foresight and the vision of the Caithness community has been leading the nation. So I want to put that on record. And the last thing that I would say is that, given the fact right at the beginning, and Councillor Mackey, I see that he's got his hand up, so he's here, although I can't see his face. When we wrote as councillors right at the end of March to the funding organisations to encourage them to lax their rules, their regulations, and to turn around the applications that they were going to get very, very quickly to help provide resilience funding to the local communities. We have to take our hats off to these committees and to the people who are on these committees because of what they did. That letter that you sent out, Struan, was well received, and an awful lot of them were already in the motions of turning that round, and that letter endorsed it. And there are so many organisations out there who have received funding and have been able to turn a tap on that they would never have been able to turn on as fast with the government funding that was coming through the various channels. And Alan, some of the funds that were coming through that we could not access because we were COVID-19, you know what I'm talking about, when COVID-19 put the kibosh on some of us becoming SCIOs, and you acted as the receiver for funds like that coming from Highlands and Islands Enterprise. That conduit was so important to many organisations, including the one that you mentioned that I'm the chair of. Oh, by the way, Chair, will you please note my interest? Because I'm now talking all about it and haven't realised I should have declared an interest as chair of one of the TSI. Oh, what a blooper that is. Noted, thank you. What a blooper that was. Just exactly how not to declare an interest. But there you go. That's exactly what we've been doing, and I don't think anybody will mind the fact that I didn't declare as an interest. We've all been actively involved in this, and it's I take my hat off to absolutely everybody, to Alec, to Alan, to your teams, to everybody out there who's made a contribution, big or small, in any way that they have. Well done. We're not through it yet, but what confidence we have that this community can see itself to the end of this and beyond because of it. Thank you.
Alan, Alex, how do you begin to answer that wide-ranging point from Councillor Brenner? Is there anything you'd like to respond with?
Well, thanks, obviously, Raymond. Raymond very much played his part as well, that's for sure. I think, Raymond, you mentioned about what are the kind of benefits maybe going forward from what we've seen. So I've jotted down a few things, like obviously partnership working, team working throughout the county has been superb. Everybody's got to know people that much better, even though we've not met anybody. Through the social medias and Zooms and whatever, we all know each other now so much better, and we know who to contact. And I'm sure people are contacting each other now that obviously I don't know about, but they've met people, and there's a lot of networking going on. Like we found and I know you say this, we've found people now that we knew were, or we didn't know were struggling beforehand. People that were struggling beforehand, now at least we've got contact with these people, and we can try and improve their lives going forward. Volunteering, a lot more people volunteering. Hopefully they'll continue doing that in some form in the future. I think we've got stronger organisations now. I'll give you a couple of examples. Leipster and Thurso Development Trust. Like Leipster, when I say Leipster, Caithness Community Connections went in and did work. I said they were a new organisation. They have been working every day in Leipster, supporting the community there. And in these last 3 months, they've got to know that community. It would have taken them probably 3 years under normal circumstances to get to know the dynamics of the community, and there are quite significant dynamics. But they've got to grasp with that and all the struggles in 3 months. So that's made them, I think the same goes for Thurso Community Development Trust, another new organisation, or relatively new, that has done a tremendous job covering not only Thurso but the 2 other community council areas we spoke about. And they've got to know their community, again, that much quicker than they ever could possibly have done otherwise. And they've got a lot more volunteers. They've got evidence now for future projects. So I think the third sector in the community is a lot stronger because of the work they put in. So I don't know if Alec wants to add to that.
Yeah, thanks. As a council officer, it's very difficult for me to kind of make comment here, but one comment I would like to make, and I think that I think it's one we should all really agree on. I feel that with the community spirit there, we now have a far firmer base to build our community partnership on. I think that we need to make sure we don't lose that that firm base that's been established through all the excellent work that's been taken. Again, I say I really can't make any further comment as a council officer. I don't know what's planned, but I would like to think that we can use that as a firm building block going forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Apologies, I'm having internet problems. My internet dropped off just now, but I think I caught the end of what Alex said there. And I have Councillor Mackey, Councillor Mackay and Councillor Rosie waiting to come in. So Councillor Mackey.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thanks both Alex and Alan for your updates. I think everything that you've said, very much resonates with myself and colleagues. And I'd like to echo what Raymond said about our community. I think for a long time we've believed that we have a very special community in Caithness, and now after COVID-19 we know it. It's there, it's in black and white, it's demonstrable. We know exactly what we have in this part of the world. And I think when many people believe that government is the ultimate safety net, we've actually shown that the community is there. And I remember that meeting that we had in the town hall in Wick, when we were looking at the scenes across northern Italy and Spain and the genuine worry. And I remember something that Councillor Bremner said was that we would not accept people falling through the gaps. And I think that was the absolute right tone. And I think that actually the resilience efforts from both the council and the community interface organisations have demonstrated that fantastically. And I think that I am delighted that on the back of the shared partnership work that we've done, we have seen good come from it, and I thank Councillor Bremner for raising that letter, because I know in some instances it ruffled feathers, but in others it released money, and it certainly sped up some cases as well. But it is important to note that many organisations were already carrying out that fleet of foot sort of approach to it. Just before I go into a couple of questions specifically for Alan, I think it's also worth noting, as a councillor, probably putting on my record a bit of public thanks to our ward manager. Just like we were talking about the police and we were talking about our schools, I know that Alex has not been doing what I'm sure you would have thought you would have been doing in your regular ward management duties, Alex. And I know that it's been there's been some hard grafting in there, and I'd just like to thank you for all that you've done over this period, in addition to continuing to support the membership, as your role says. Alan, in the new vein of the Caithness Committee, which is trying to drive things forward, getting actions, and then looking at decisions that we've made or things that we're going to do, I just want to ask you quite frankly, what is it that you think as members we can do to support the third sector through this period of, let's call it recovery, because I think that's a positive way to look at it. And also, Chair, if you don't mind, I think after we get the response from Alan, I'd like to maybe see if we can action to have Alan come back to the next committee in October, because that would be quite a good acid test of whether we're actually putting stuff forward and how we can show that we're trying to progress issues. Because I think I'm actually quite happy with what has been discussed, but I think we should definitely take some of the action points that are happening in these groups and that have been absolutely excellent. I've not been involved in all of them, but I've seen the work that's going out, and actually having that reported to Caithness Committee, which is obviously a public forum and a function where our constituents can engage with. But I would just like to throw it to Alan. What is it that we can do? How can we support you as we drive this committee going forward?
Yeah, thanks, Drew. I think, like as I mentioned earlier, we've got a lot of we've got groups supporting a lot of people at the moment, and that can't continue forever through people going back to work, through kind of fatigue, through groups wanting to get back to what they were set up to do. So there are various reasons. Don't get me wrong, nobody's going to be left behind, sort of thing, but we need to start to work with all these people on what I call the Castletown model, because Christine and her team in Castletown have already started this, to individually work with each person to see what support they need to get them back living independently and hopefully to a better lifestyle than maybe they were before COVID-19, if that's possible. So what I think what we need, and that goes for everybody, is to work together, and we'll need your contacts, we need your expertise. We need to know, Raymond, we've spoken about this before, where we've came across, or the volunteers have came across issues that are difficult for volunteers to cope with in community groups. So we need to know who to go to, and if that people aren't doing as maybe they should be doing, then we need you folks to chivvy them along, shall we say, slightly. So I think it's just all working together, and I'll be more than happy if invited to come along in October, and a lot of work in between times as well. But I think that's kind of the main thing. I said we need, there's the recovery for Caithness is going to be so many wide issues that are well out of my pay scale or remit or brain power. So we're going to need everybody working together. So that's what I kind of think myself.
Absolutely happy to agree that suggestion, and I think we should get a sort of up-to-date action tracker for committee and make sure there's timescales attached to that as well and responsibilities assigned. So happy to take that suggestion. Councillor Mackay.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah. Wonderful comments, member. Wonderful comments, and I don't want to repeat what's been said already. That was the advice I was given by a very popular chair in the chamber in Inverness. He was in a hurry that day, and he said, "I don't want to hear what's been said already." So where do we start? Well, first of all, I'll have to declare an interest here, because I'm the vice chair of the CVG. Forgot about that, Chair. A director, in other words. So sorry about that, but great stuff, Alan. Absolutely wonderful how you pulled everything together in the last 4 months. Absolutely tremendous coordinating. Well done. Councillor Bremner, you mentioned sanitizer. Yeah, just to say, members, that free sanitizer is now being offered to all the schools in Caithness from the Ice and Fire Gin Distillery in Latheran Wheel. So well done there, well done. Alec, an absolute amazing report, Alec. And you were saying you were humbled with the comments of the voluntary sector and the work that they've done. Now, in particular, I'll pull out one little comment you made there, Alec, about the shielding and the girls phoning round to the people on the other end of the phone. How reassuring that was for these people. Absolutely. I can just see them there speaking away and getting great confidence about this COVID. So it was so important, that friendly phone call. So well done there, Alec. Well done. Tremendous report. So is the community on our side, you were asking, Alec? definitely the community is on our side, irrespective of the negative comments we get from day to day. The community is on our side. Yeah, thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Mackay. Councillor Rosie?
Never easy following Councillor Mackay, so I'm going to try and avoid repeating the many things that have been said. And look, you know, how do you express what happened? Very, very difficult. Maybe just one negative, and it would be, I think it would be improper if I did not address it. And I'm speaking about Thursday Community Development Trust here, and the headline in Jonah Road Journal on Friday passed. And I think, and I'm sure my one or two colleagues would agree with me, that at one point, and I forget when it was, but we're in the throes of getting organised in difficult circumstances, just scratching our heads very many days on what the next steps were. And I can remember a question arising about what would we do with Town Square, because it was it was clear we couldn't get more flowers for this season's planting, and the question was, well, we recognised how valued it is within Thurso and Caithness, I think. So have we got any solutions? And we turned, excuse me, folks, turned to Thurso Community Development Trust and asked if they could help. As always, they said, yes, let us think about it, and they came up with a solution which everyone knows and understands now. So look, I think you've got to recognise that the town square is seen as a focal point, and it's a fantastic asset that we've got. And I just want to congratulate Trust on what they've done. It may not be everyone's cup of tea, growing vegetables, but let's recognise the other things they've done around that. There's well-being packs, kids and adults getting the option to, excuse me, paint stones. And you know, on Saturday, I saw women, children, kids in the town square, busy away, digging, all the rest of it. And it was fantastic. So I just want to put that on record. I'm always pleased when we recognise actions and meetings, and glad that Alan's accepted the invitation to return. It's so important that we can track progress. You know, we always fall in the trap of just having another meeting. So I think that's fantastic. Just keeping on the theme of, or returning to the theme of Thurso Community Trust and the meetings with the HTSI, I remember one meeting where there was a unanimous decision reached that we should not turn our backs on the community after the pandemic. So one of the actions, Nicola, you can perhaps log and we can work towards is that, again, Thurso Community Development Trust want to look at continuing what will become a lunch club service. Now, we've already instigated what we know as an asset transfer to consider using the Highland Council greenhouses in Thurso, and I would like to think we can examine whether we can do that on a county basis, use the facilities of Wick, and just see where we can go with that. Can we expand that service across the county? So, yeah, I think that's, just bear with me 1 second, Nicola. I actually asked Thurso Community Development Trust for a performance report, for want of a better description of what they've done. And I tried to go through it and reduce it to save time here, but let me just give you some of the snap headlines. So, and I'm reading verbatim here. We have supported over 400 community members. We have over 160 volunteers. 10 chefs, cooks working in the kitchen. At our busiest, we dealt with around 230 requests in a week. As I said, they've started producing meals, 500 meals a week. I could go on and on and on, but look, I'm sure we've recognised the contribution that they made and the wider community. So absolutely fantastic. Thank you.
Thanks, Carl. And as far as Thurso Development Trust goes, I think probably we would all acknowledge that they've taken a negative situation and a difficult situation and made something positive out of it. And that's quite literally true in terms of using the gardens for growing veg and it's a thankless task sometimes stepping up to a community plate, and they have done it in an inspirational way, and I think we would all probably offer our thanks to them. Councillor Bremner and Councillor Mackay both have their hands up. I'm going to come to Councillor Rees first because he's not contributed already, and then I'll come back to you.
Thank you, Chair. I promise you my contribution will be brief. Briefly, Town Square, as Carl just mentioned, I thought Joan Laurie's comments in the Groat last week summed it up perfectly. And as you've just said, Chair, it's impossible to please everybody. This is for 1 year only. Let's see how it goes and see where we are in a year's time. I actually think there might be scope for flowers and vegetables. The sloping flower borders, which are the ones you primarily see as you come into the town from the south on the A9. I think there's potential. Maybe they could be planted with flowers, which tourists, when we get them, would see, and the veg as well. Very briefly, though, moving back to the main point of this Caithness voluntary group and the work that Alan Tate's done. Alan, just so modest and relaxed, as you always are. It's just go on and on and on about the, I mean, it's the superlatives are there, but the work you did, Alan, it's outstanding. And also, Alex, you're supposed to be our ward manager and just got landed with this enormous extra responsibility as well. So I just add to what everybody else has said. Excuse me. I also knew very early on in the emergency that we were going to be okay. And the reason for that was I was only getting literally one or two what I would term kind of emergency call situations where people either had or didn't have, I should say, their medication, or they were needing food. The number of incidents was so low that they were almost non-existent. And I was actually reassured speaking to a colleague who I know went out to one of the villages with some food for a person, because it seemed as though that person might have slipped through the cracks. But I think actually there were also, again, there were some mental health issues there as well. So as is always the case, the situation wasn't that simple, but there were so few people appeared to be getting into serious difficulties. I was also checking out west in northwest Sutherland, which is even more remote and challenging than our area, and it was a similar situation there. Councillor Mackey, you used a very interesting phrase there, is government the ultimate safety net? I mean, you could have a huge, great debate about that. I'm not going to do that. I think in urban areas, it might be, but certainly in Caithness, government is not the ultimate safety net, or hasn't been. It's the local community and local community groups who have taken up the challenge and risen to it so incredibly well, backed up, I should say, by financial help from both governments. And I think for me, there's four sort of little learning points out of that. Trust local organisations, trust Highland Council, forgive any mistakes, and congratulate where appropriate. And a lot of congratulations are in order today. But finally, and I'm sorry to be a little bit sober, but if we do get, and I pray we don't, if there is a second spike in coronavirus, I personally take considerable comfort from the fact that you can see how very well placed we are with our local community groups to take on the challenge again. Let's hope we don't have to, but if we do, I for one am very comforted. And again, Alan, congratulations. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Rees. Councillor Bremner.
Yes, thanks for the ability to come back in, noting some of the points that have been made by the contributions from other members. One point that I did mention earlier on was the letter that Councillor Mackey had written to the funding organisations, and how they have played an important role in being able to look at the criteria, the qualifying criteria, and to relax that and to allow our community organisations to tap into that funding and support the COVID-19 resilience response. I wonder if Councillor Mackey would be so good to consider following up on that letter and expressing our sincere thanks, and wondering if they would, and with a view to asking them to continue to be considerate as we move forward, and possibly out of exiting the lockdown, but with a view to understanding that if ever something like that arose again, we would have their same support. So if Councillor Mackey would consider that. The second thing is to Alex and to the Chair. We've mentioned a lot about the council's own officers here, and I think it would be remiss of us if we didn't actually acknowledge the support that we've received from a lot of them. I know that at the beginning, and Alan can vouch for this, Alan Tate, where we actually asked some of their officers, and that includes the lead here for the service point and also housing. When they came in, we were able to ask questions at the TSI level, and they had answers at the flick of a switch. They just had the ability to be able to say the telephone numbers and how to access that. And I think, so that's maybe for Alan to consider that, but also for the chair to make sure that if we're going forward in a manner of supporting organisations like the TSI or the community partnership, that we look at the level of officer input there, because quite often the level of officers that are engaging are maybe not the level that we could engage, because we saw how effective some of the officers that we invited into those meetings actually tackled the problems that were being faced by those on the ground, especially considering that the service point, they get all the queries under heaven at their desk, and they're the ones that have got the most knowledge of where people should go. Councillor Mackay, it would be remiss of us not to notice that the volunteers and the work that they've done, how much of them have continued on from some of the volunteer work that we've already been doing here in Caithness. We can't miss that the amenities, they've extended the volunteers to cover amenities when the amenities were all in shutdown within Highland Council. We've had yourself and so many other people supporting you in the cemeteries, and myself as well, and also extending that to make our areas look so much better, given the fact that the council couldn't attend to them. So I think that should go on record as well. And the last thing I would mention, the second spike that Councillor Rees mentioned there just now, I think some of us and our communities were well aware of just exactly what we were tackling from the onset of this. We knew around about the 9th, 10th of April where we were going and how it landed up not materialising the way that we thought that it was, and it kept us on our toes. So the level of communication going forward needs to be as good as it got and better when we go forward. That way the community is fully informed, even at a local level, what the level of expectation is. If we know that shops are going to be having people that are going to have to wear masks, come Monday, those shops, in my personal opinion, should have already had the sign saying, as of next Monday, you won't be allowed in here unless you've got a mask on. That kind of level of preparatory communication can still be better if we're ever going to face something like this again. And thanks again for your latitude.
Okay, no problem. And I've noted down those action points. Alan, you wanted to respond to that?
Yeah, could I just come in on one very quick point? It's just it's just something that has been on my mind. Like obviously, yeah, the wind farm money was great, and they all came together, and that's been an issue for a lot of years, is kind of county-wide funding and so on, and we saw that with the COVID-19 crisis. But I wonder that we've also probably got a mental health crisis on our hands at the moment as well, and if we're going to tackle that again county-wide, I don't know if Struan could add a paragraph in his letter just to see if that's something that they would be willing to get involved with, the wind farms and the other funders, because I think we're going to need that level of support to do something. And I don't know what that is yet, but we need to work on that, I think.
Thanks, Alan. I think we'll take that up offline and discuss in more detail. Struan's nodding, so yeah, we can discuss that. Councillor Mackay.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Thanks for allowing me to come back in. Yeah, Raymond, yeah, well done on the cemeteries. We have got volunteers actually appearing all over the county now. It's really interesting to know, and I hope we get that resources presentation for amenities later in the year for Highland Council. I hope that comes off too, Raymond. Yeah, but while I was coming back in, Chair, just to reassure Carl, Rosie, can I tell you about Sir John Square, Thurso? It came up several years ago when the gardeners' positions were under threat in Highland Council. And it was said in the chamber, Carl, I can reassure you, that it was said that any town or village in the north of Scotland and beyond would give their right hand for such a beautiful area and a welcoming sight on the arrival in Thurso. Irrespective of how it looks today, Carl, I can assure you it's fine. And I can assure you again, it will always be. Yeah, I know, because I was there yesterday. I've seen it. Everything's looking good there, Carl. So I can reassure you that is a fantastic area, Sir John Square, and always will be. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, thanks, members. Following on from this debate, I think that I'd like to propose a motion, and I'm confident that it's one that you'll all be willing to support. The motion would read as follows. Caithness Area Committee wishes to formally acknowledge the astonishing community and voluntary response to the coronavirus pandemic, which has been both inspirational and humbling. Local members, on behalf of the Highland Council, thank the community of Caithness and will work together to agree a formal, lasting tribute to the many people who have come together to get us through these difficult times. That's the motion that I'm proposing on behalf of Caithness Committee, and I'm looking for a seconder.
I'm happy to second from Ward 2, Nicola, without wishing to jump in too fast if you want someone from this side of the county, which I hope you do.
Happy to take that, Councillor Rees, and I think everyone's hand went up, so unanimously seconded. Councillor Mackay, did you want to come? Your hand's up.
Oh, sorry, Chair, I forgot to take it down.
Okay, excellent. I think then that concludes today's business, unless there's anything else.
Point of order.
Councillor Bremner?
Yes, I know there is no item for any other competent business on the agenda. However, I realise the importance of this meeting to the community, and also the importance of being able to discuss matters of utmost importance to the community. I have got a matter I'd like to bring to the councillors' attention, if that was felt appropriate.
Fine by me, Councillor Bremner.
Thank you. And with that, I'll also be proposing a motion when it comes to it. We have an issue here that we've been trying to tackle in Caithness, and I know that normally we would normally have reports coming from other sections of the council, and one of that would be housing. However, they are not on the agenda today, and I know that I am not in a position where I want to wait until it does come on the agenda. We've been having discussions with the chair of the Housing and Property Committee, that David Goldie has been in attendance, and also the housing manager for the north here and the principal housing officer for housing here in Caithness and Sutherland. We have an ongoing problem that we've been talking about for years, but it seems that little action, material action, is actually being undertaken to be able to tackle that problem. It's simply acknowledged as a problem in Caithness. It affects the Highland Council's performance when it comes to housing, despite the exhaustive efforts of the local housing team here. And I think that we now need to take that seriously within Caithness and to the Highland Council's attention. And with that, I have the following motion that I want to bring forward, and I'm looking for a seconder. And that reads as follows. Caithness Committee recognises the ongoing challenges in Caithness in respect of void housing stock. It also recognises the commitment made from the new chair of Housing and Property Committee to meet the challenge by reviewing and implementing necessary action to reduce the impact that void housing has on the housing performance of Highland Council. The Caithness Committee supports and recognises the excellent work of the local housing team in achieving the level of service they are currently delivering. I look for a seconder for that, and I'm quite happy to put it in the chat if necessary.
Councillor Rosie, you're waving. Are you seconding? Yeah, so seconded by Councillor Rosie. Councillor Mackay?
Yeah, I'll take down my hand now. I was going to second it. Well done, Carl.
Are any members otherwise minded? I think the motion passes then. Yeah. Okay, excellent. One other item of any other business. There's obviously been a lot that we've discussed today, and I know that we've always spoken in the past about wanting to improve communications coming out of Caithness Area Committee. So I've got a note here of a few items that I'll pass on to Sylvia and look to communicate myself through the Facebook page as well. which is that we give thanks to the school staff for their outstanding work during the crisis, that there has been a high compliance in Caithness to the COVID regulations and only 2 arrests, and the Police Scotland wanted to recognise that. The formal passing of the motion of thanks to the community and voluntary responders, and Raymond's motion on the housing stock just now. So I'll look to put an update on Caithness Committee Facebook page and see if we can get some press activity around those 5 items as well. Okay, I think that concludes everything if everyone's happy. Thanks very much, everyone.
Chair.
Take care.
Well done, Chair.
Councillor Mackay.
Yeah, Chair. I think we've been clapping our hands virtually here today, members, and I think we should clap it again for our Chair, who has handled the technology very well. The technology, that's the secret, got us all through it all, so well done, Nicola.
So young, Willie, I'm well used to technology.
Point of order, Chair.
Agreed.
Point of order.
Raymond.
Can I just quickly ask, is this, recognising the point that Councillor Mackay made there just now, I think this is probably what I have felt one of the best Caithness Committee meetings that I've attended in a long, long time. And I have to say, I think it's by virtue of it being virtual. And I noticed that it's being recorded. And I think that the public would welcome the ability to be able to scrutinise what our discussions and deliberations are. Can I have confirmation that this will be, this meeting, having been recorded, will be available on the Council's webcast library?
Anne, Alex, would either of you be able to confirm that? I think it should be.
I'll need to check on that because I was pointed towards looking at the Lochaber meeting, but I couldn't find it on the website. But I will take a note to see what's happening. But my indication or my understanding is it would be available somewhere. But I'll check on that for you.
Okay, thanks, Alex. And Raymond, I think there's a note going that you've posted your motion into the Education Committee. So can you repost it into the Caithness Committee chat so that we've got a note of it? Councillor Rosie?
Just very briefly, I think it's vitally important. We've recognised what the community have done for us over the last few months. I think it's vitally important that today's meeting is shared so that they can get an understanding of our appreciation. Thank you.
Yeah, completely agree with that. Okay, everyone. Thanks very much. Look forward to seeing you again soon.
Onwards and upwards.